Christopher was upset. At my brother Alex's wedding, my dad publicly insulted me, saying I was a disgrace to the family and that I wasn't wanted there. Alex didn't defend me, and I felt like leaving in anger. But then, a staff member asked for help with a problem, and I ended up surprising my dad in a way he never expected. My name is Christopher, and I have one brother, Alex. Our dad, who is a lawyer, always pushed Alex more than me. Growing up, we had no free time because we were always studying or going to lessons. Even playing with friends wasn't allowed. I tried hard to meet my dad's expectations and to be like Alex, whom I looked up to, but no matter how hard I worked, I always felt inferior to Alex and disappointed my dad. One important moment in my life was when I took an entrance exam for a prestigious private school. I knew it was a long shot, but I tried anyway. Unfortunately, I failed. After that, my dad mostly ignored me and focused on Alex instead. This was really painful for me. The only person who seemed to care was my mom. When she asked if I was okay, I just said I was fine. I decided I would make my own path. After high school, I left home without telling my dad or Alex. I only left a note for my mom because I needed to get away. I found a job at a hotel where I could also live. I applied right away and got the job. Since I started working there, I felt much happier. Life isn't suffocating like it was at home, and I can focus on what I want to do. My manager, Michael, is very strict. I often made mistakes and had to apologize a lot. I was just a high school graduate and didn't know much about the job, so I got scolded frequently, but I worked hard, and Michael actually praised me when I did things well, which encouraged me. One significant event happened at the start of the new year. It's the busiest time for the hotel. After finishing my training, I finally got to work alone. That year, the hotel was more crowded than usual. Guests either ate in a big dining room or had their meals delivered to their rooms, making it really hectic. Although I was a rookie and caused some problems, I tried my best. Then, something unexpected happened on New Year's Day. A coworker got sick with the flu, and we were short-staffed. I worked really hard, probably twice as much as I was supposed to. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the kitchen sink pipe broke during dinner service, and of course, no plumber was available on New Year's Day. It was a huge mess, and Michael, our manager, was getting more frustrated. I decided to take a bold step and told Michael I could help. I'll try to fix the plumbing, I told Michael. He and the others looked confused, but he didn't have a choice. With a hopeful tone, he asked, "Christopher, can you do it?" I got to work on the plumbing. Actually, I had gone to a science-focused high school after failing to get into the private school my dad wanted. There, I learned about engineering and got some hands-on experience. After about half an hour, I managed to fix the pipe. "Michael, it's fixed," I called out. He rushed over and turned on the faucet. Water flowed out strongly, and everyone smiled. "Great job, Christopher, you're my pride and joy," Michael said. It felt amazing to be praised by him. We made it through New Year's Day at the hotel, and I'll never forget the fulfillment I felt that day. It really shaped who I am today. 15 years have passed since then, and I've fully adapted to my job. One day, I received a letter from my mom after a long time. It turned out that Alex was getting married. I keep in touch with mom a few times a year, but I haven't spoken to dad or Alex in years. The letter asked me to attend Alex's wedding. I felt a wave of emotions. Why should I go? I wrote back to my mom, saying I couldn't attend, but another letter came quickly, begging me to make it. I reluctantly agreed to go. The wedding would be at a luxury hotel. Alex's bride was a young woman from a prestigious company, and the guest list was huge, much larger than the New Year's celebration at my hotel. It all seemed very lavish, just like Alex and Dad. On the wedding day, I wore an old suit and headed to the venue. I checked in at the reception and was led to the waiting room. There were already many people there, all looking like high society folks. I spotted Alex's bride in the back, a woman with long, beautiful hair. Feeling a bit out of place and with no one to talk to, I started people watching. Suddenly, I locked eyes with two men I recognized, Dad and Alex. They looked unhappy. Dad approached me and asked, "Why are you here?" It was the first time I had heard his deep voice in years. "Is it so wrong to celebrate Alex's wedding?" "Oh, by the way, congrats, Alex," I said. Alex looked conflicted. He probably couldn't openly thank me in front of Dad. "What have you been up to all these years?" "Probably some worthless job," Dad said. Just then, Mom rushed over to us and said, "Come on, Christopher is here to celebrate." "No need to be." Mom was upset and tried hard to convince Dad, but her voice was lost in his anger. "Enough, Mom, Christopher, let me make this clear, you're a disgrace. I don't want you ruining Alex's celebration. Get out. Hearing this made me even angrier. I didn't even want to be at Alex's wedding, and yet I was being treated like this. This is why I didn't want to come in the first place. Fine, I'm leaving, I said. I turned my back to exit the waiting room. I grabbed my things and was about to walk out when I heard someone call my name. Please wait. A wedding staff member rushed over. It seems we have an unexpected guest for today's wedding. We're short on seats and food. Everyone in the waiting room looked worried. Emily, the wedding planner, and the parents-in-law need help. What does this have to do with me? I thought, feeling all my frustrations against Dad and Alex bubbling up. But then I remembered the good times Alex and I had when we were kids. He always made time to play with me during study breaks. If I just walked away, I would be no better than Dad. I turned back to the staff member. Can you take me to Emily? The staff member looked relieved and led me back into the waiting room, to the same place I had just been kicked out of. In the center of the room, Emily, Dad, and the bride's father all looked worried as I approached. My eyes met Dad's, and he asked, "Why has Christopher returned?" He looked furious, but before he could say more, Emily spoke up. "General Manager, please help us." Dad's eyes widened in shock. "You see," I explained, "I'm now the general manager for all the hotels in my company. When I first joined, we were just starting to expand. Now, we have hotels and wedding venues all over the country, and this hotel we're in right now is one of the ones I oversee." "I think I can handle this," I said calmly. "Dad, I'm busy right now. We'll talk later." I turned back to Emily. "Relax. Get the seats and everything else ready, I'll take care of the food." The stress faded from Emily's face. "Understood. I'll leave the food to the general manager and handle the rest." With that, Emily rushed off. Now it was my turn. Everyone in the waiting room was watching me as I left the room and headed to my friend, Chef Jackson. This hotel has a high-end restaurant, and Jackson is a good friend of mine. "Hey, you in?" I called out. After some wrestling, Jackson appeared. "Christopher. What brings you here?" he asked. "I'm here for my brother's wedding, but we're short one meal. Can you help?" "Sure thing. I'll whip something up," he replied. "Much appreciated." "I owe you dinner. I'm looking forward to it," I said as I returned to the waiting room after taking care of a few things. The guests had already moved to the ceremony area, leaving only my parents and the bride's parents behind. Problem solved. "We've got an extra meal coming," I announced. Upon hearing this, my mom and the bride's parents looked relieved, while Dad had a conflicted expression. "Christopher, thank you so much. Because of you, the celebration can go on successfully," he said. "It's all in a day's work as a general manager," I replied, and with that, we all entered the ceremony hall. The lights dimmed, and the groom and bride walked in. Alex looked incredibly handsome, and his bride was stunning. The ceremony proceeded, and then it was meal time. I made sure everyone was served and breathed a sigh of relief as the ceremony concluded successfully. The faces of the groom and bride were filled with happiness. After the ceremony, we had a little talk with Alex's family and the bride's family. They were especially grateful to me, and I was thanked profusely. "Christopher, thank you so much. We had the best day ever, all thanks to you." "No worries. Wishing you all the happiness in the world," I replied. I glanced at Dad and Alex, both had complicated expressions. Mom walked over to me. "Christopher, you did wonderfully." "Thank you. Dad and Alex want to speak to you." I looked back at Dad and Alex. Alex spoke first. "Christopher, you saved us." "Thank you, and I'm sorry for everything." As long as I could help Alex, everything was good. Dad lowered his head without saying anything, he seemed to have no words. That was fine with me. After all, I had never become like Dad. Just then, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the manager from a hotel in the next town over. More work was coming my way, but I enjoyed my job, so I had no complaints. "Alright, I'm off to work." "You two take care," I said. I probably wouldn't see Alex or Dad again, so I left the room without looking back. 3 days after Alex's wedding, I was enjoying a rare day off. I sat on the sofa, sipping warm coffee, my happy time. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I wondered who it could be as I went to answer it. To my surprise, Alex was standing there. "Alex, what brings you here?" I asked. "Sorry, I got your address from Mom. I wanted to talk to you." "Christopher wants to talk to me?" I thought. Maybe he came to say thanks again. "Well, do you want to come in?" "Sorry for the mess. If it's okay with you, I'd like that," he replied with a forced smile. I invited him in and served him coffee. "Thank you. Smells good," he said as he took a slow sip. "Seems like we both enjoy coffee. So, what did you want to talk about?" Alex put down his cup and looked me straight in the eye. "I'm really sorry for everything," he said. I was puzzled. He came all this way just to say that? A phone call would have sufficed. "Hey, it's all right," I replied. "Actually, I came today because I want to share some things with you," Alex continued. "If you don't mind, I'd like you to hear my grievances." "Grievances?" I was left speechless. Alex began to speak slowly. "You might think I'm the older brother who can do anything, but I envy you, Christopher. You're free from Dad's pressures, living your own life away from our parents." I couldn't find the words. I had no idea Alex felt that way. A silence filled the room, and I felt somewhat guilty. After all, I had unintentionally shifted all of Dad's expectations onto Alex. Choosing my words carefully, I said, "Alex, I'm sorry. I never considered that you were struggling too." My brother smiled weakly. "That's just it, it's not your fault, Christopher. I was the weak one." Hearing that, I finally found my words. "Alex, I think you've been through struggles I can't even imagine. I truly admire that," I said, "but I also want you to know about me." I took a deep breath, pausing to collect my thoughts. Alex listened intently, not saying anything. Breaking away from my parents and becoming independent wasn't easy either. The beginning was really tough. "Yeah, that's true. We both have our share of hardships," Alex responded. It seemed he had more to say. I didn't consider myself wise enough to convince him, nor did I know the right words. So, I said what I honestly felt. "To be honest, I think you should do what you really want to do, Alex. Don't worry about Dad." After thinking about my words,
My mother-in-law criticizes me a lot because I prefer to keep to myself at home. She calls me lazy and says I should leave. But isn't she the one who eats and sleeps all day without doing anything? She should be the one to go. I'm Kelly, and I've recently become addicted to potato chips while watching TV. Now, at 39, I've gained extra weight because I haven't been active and ate too much. 2 years ago, I started working from home, which I thought was great because I could sleep in without commuting. But my mother-in-law keeps telling me to get ready for work, even though I don't need to leave the house. She's staying with us without asking. Last year, with the pandemic, we stopped visiting her, and suddenly she moved in with us to be close to her grandchild. Today, my mother-in-law is moving in with us, even though both my husband and I didn't want it. We have a 5-year-old daughter, and we stopped visiting them to keep her safe from getting sick. I didn't like the visit from my mother-in-law, who came from a busier city than ours, leaving my father-in-law behind at their home. Living with my mother-in-law is really annoying, and there's no benefit to it. I've tried to politely ask her to go back, but she ignores us completely. No matter how many times we say we want her to leave, she accuses us of being cold to older people or not caring about family. On the first day she moved in, there was a big argument, and instead of going home, she tried to lock herself in the upstairs of our house. When I blocked her from entering a room, she got angry and upset our child. We were too tired from work and taking care of our child to stand up to her, so we ended up living with her. I tried to explain to her that I work from home now because of changes in my company due to the pandemic, but she doesn't believe me, saying that people in construction can't work from home. I'm actually in the administration department, and I can work on a computer from home. She doesn't trust young people and thinks we don't understand technology. My mother-in-law keeps insisting that there's no such thing as a convenient job like working from home. No matter how much I explain, she won't listen. She's really good at justifying herself and exhausting everyone around her with lectures. To avoid arguments before work, I usually just agree with whatever she says. But the problem doesn't go away. The next day, and every day after, my mother-in-law started calling me a freeloader because I work from home while my husband works outside. She says I just sit around having fun on the computer. She criticizes me constantly, even though I take care of the house, make breakfast, clean, and do the shopping. Ironically, she's the one who does nothing but eat the meals I prepare, snacks I buy, and lounges around the house all day. Despite my complaints, she won't leave. One day, during an online meeting, she burst into my room demanding sweets. I had to explain I was working, but she accused me of pretending. Living with her is really tough. My mother-in-law keeps complaining about little things like having bread for breakfast 2 days in a row and calls me stupid for not being more attentive. Yet, she hasn't contributed anything to our living expenses since moving in. To be honest, I pay the $1,800 monthly mortgage for this house that's in my name. When my husband and I got married, he faced an unreasonable job transfer and was threatened with a demotion when he declined. So he made the tough decision to quit. At the time, I was financially stable working at a larger construction company, so I took out the mortgage in my name. Now, my husband contributes to our expenses, and we share everything as a couple. I'm definitely not the freeloader my mother-in-law claims I am. One day, she insisted I go buy sweets, and when I locked her out of the room to work, she banged on the door and disrupted my meeting. It was so bad that my husband, who's usually careful with his words, cursed and yelled at her, saying enough is enough. Even he had reached his limit. My mother-in-law is assertive with the attitude that she's the parent here, but when my husband gets really angry, she becomes weak. If my husband could control his anger better, maybe she would have left. After he physically escorted her to the front door, she quieted down a bit. Eventually, my husband had to physically remove her from our home, but she forcefully pushed her way back into the house. My husband and I tried to stop her, but we ended up with bruises on our arms and legs. It seems like my mother-in-law is determined not to leave without a fight. She hates being told what to do, so even if we kick her out, she might just come back. We had no idea how to deal with her. Although she had been quiet for a while, one day she started again. She told me she met a neighbor during her walk who mentioned that their wife works from home sometimes but also goes to the office. My mother-in-law used this to claim that I was lying about working from home. She interrupted me at work to prove her point. I tried to explain that my company allows me to work fully remotely, especially since we have a child. But she kept accusing me of lying and being childish. She laughed triumphantly, saying people are shocked to hear that someone works from home like I do. She doesn't believe remote work like mine exists. Despite my attempts to politely ask her to leave so I could focus, she ignored me. She accused us of causing the situation because we stopped visiting her. Her ranting intensified, and I couldn't concentrate on my work. I really need to finish this program for my job, but dealing with her is making it difficult. She demanded that I listen to her and forcefully turned off my laptop, causing me to lose about an hour's worth of work. Then, she insulted me, calling me a freeloader and telling me to get out of the house. In her anger, she even threw the computer at me, breaking the monitor. Luckily, it was my personal laptop and not a company one, but it was still upsetting. I couldn't understand why she called me a freeloader when she's the one who does as she pleases without contributing anything to the household. No one welcomed her presence, and it was frustrating. After that incident, I decided not to argue with her anymore. Since my computer was broken, I had to go into the office to work and reduce contact with her. She made sarcastic remarks, but I ignored them. When my husband heard what happened, he was furious and determined to kick her out. But just kicking her out wouldn't satisfy me. I decided to endure a little longer until she went on a trip with a friend. During that time, I planned to give her a taste of her own medicine. A week later, my mother-in-law returned from her trip in a good mood. But she found me in the room she had been using. She demanded I unlock the door, but I stood my ground, telling her that this was my house and I had been using the room for years. So I told my mother-in-law firmly that she had to leave. She was furious and kicked the door, but I didn't open it. My daughter's voice came from behind the door, asking Grandma to handle things. It seems my husband was also there, advising her not to end up like Grandma. My husband gave my mother-in-law 3 choices. Leave now, think about it, and then leave, or leave and never come back. Despite her anger, my daughter's words seemed to have an impact, and my mother-in-law's voice became weak. She argued back, saying she did nothing wrong, but my husband pointed out how she only thought about herself. Frustrated, I decided to open the door. My mother-in-law was shocked by what she saw inside. She asked where Jung was, and I jokingly said I threw him out with the trash. Jung turned out to be her favorite Korean idol. She had collected CDs and merchandise related to him and had even attended events he participated in. Most of her suitcase was filled with Jung items. When she decorated the room with his posters and photos, I replaced everything with posters of the Backstreet Boys and their merchandise, and even changed the curtains. She was upset that everything was different, and we argued about the changes, but it seems my prank caught her off guard and changed her mood. So I decided to play a prank by replacing everything in the room with items that were age-appropriate. I changed the posters to ones of the Backstreet Boys, replaced the curtains, and even swapped out her favorite Joe items with different decorations. When my mother-in-law saw the changes, she was shocked and upset. She asked about her belongings, and I teased her about the cost of the new items, saying that each poster was expensive and even showing off a designer carpet and a Homer Simpson stuffed toy I bought. I explained that if I were really a freeloader, I wouldn't have the money to buy all these things. This seemed to deflate her, and she didn't argue back. Then, I showed her the outfit she would wear the next day. A pair of stylish pants and a t-shirt with freeloader written on it. My mother-in-law was overwhelmed by everything and started to tear up. Eventually, she decided to leave, pulling out her suitcase from the trip and exiting our house. My husband and daughter supported my decision, and she finally left. But I hadn't expected to be this effective later. I contacted my in-laws and said, if you want the June goods back, please pay for the past living expenses. And the computer did I really throw the goods away? Of course, not that would be a crime. Even if it's family, I just pretended to have thrown them away to break her spirit. In fact, all of my mother-in-law's personal belongings were hidden in my husband's room. Relieved, my mother-in-law immediately accepted my demands. For John's sake, she transferred the money for the past living expenses and a new computer to our account. However, the money came from her husband's retirement funds, which were supposed to be saved for any future needs. Moreover, the money for the trip and her fan activities for Joe also came from those retirement funds. Originally, my father-in-law was bitter about my mother-in-law's uninvited stay at our house and furious about the reckless spending of his retirement funds. Naturally, they ended up divorcing after a huge fight. Since the family home originally belonged to my father-in-law, my mother-in-law was kicked out, probably hoping to rely on us. My mother-in-law found herself without support after my husband declared he wouldn't take care of her after such a flashy showdown with me. She resigned herself to her fate and didn't seek help. In the end, she moved in with her estranged sister, but was reportedly quite tormented by her niece's good riddance. Meanwhile, our household has become even livelier with our daughter starting elementary school. Lately, she's been learning to make sandwiches at school recreations, and she insists on serving her creations to us every day, so our dinners are full of sandwiches. Well, someday she'll make the best sandwiches for someone important to her, so for now, we're happy to be her practice subjects. My husband, who hadn't had much chance for recognition since changing jobs finally last year thanks to a review of the company's evaluation system, he was able to get a promotion. It's tough when you join a company from the good old days without a solid evaluation system. Hopefully, times will keep changing for the easier thanks to that our lives have gained a bit more comfort. Well, we can't say very luxurious due to the high cost of living, but as long as my husband is here and my daughter and we can eat together as a family, I think we're living a very happy life. What you consider happiness is up to the individual, right? Fortunately, I can keep working happily, and except for my weight, I don't have any health worries. When our daughter said I want to take care of a rescued cat, we went to a cat adoption event and our family grew. Now it's 3 people and 3 pets living together. How could this life not be happy these days? I think I'm living the happiest days compared to anyone. I'm Chloe, an architect. I had planned every little detail of my wedding, from the flowers to the songs. I always dreamed of this day being like a scene from a romance book where love wins. Jack, my fiancé, was standing at the altar with a nervous smile. He's an engineer, very logical, unlike me, who is more creative. I thought we balanced each other out well. I was so happy to start this new part of life with him. But when our eyes met, I noticed he seemed distant, almost troubled. I thought it was just nerves. I was wrong. As I walked towards Jack, his mom Linda whispered something to her neighbor, sizing me up with narrowed eyes. When she saw me looking, she forced a smile and said I looked beautiful, but it didn't seem genuine. The ceremony went on, and when the pastor asked if Jack would take me as his wife, there was a long, painful pause before he finally said, I do. But his eyes didn't have the warm feeling I'd always associated with those words. As we exchanged rings, Linda stood up and took a photo, loudly saying we needed to capture the moment because weddings are just the beginning of a lifelong commitment. The irony wasn't lost on me. It felt more like a warning than a blessing. During the reception, Linda came over to me while I was talking to some old college friends. Oh, Chloe, she said in a sweet tone, your dress is lovely, though a bit unconventional for a wedding. But then again, you've always been rebellious, haven't you? I looked at her, forcing a smile. Well, I believe weddings are about celebrating love, so why stick to tradition? I tried to keep things light. Before Linda could reply, Jack stepped in, telling his mom to leave me alone because it's our day. I felt a momentary relief, thinking he was finally supporting me. But then he added, besides, there's no point arguing about dresses and traditions now, is there? His words carried a sense of resignation that shouldn't have been there on what was supposed to be our happiest day. I looked around the room, hoping to find someone who could reassure me that everything was normal, that it was just wedding stress making everyone act strange. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The warning signs were too obvious to ignore. As we prepared for our first dance, Jack held me at arm's length. Our bodies moved to the music, but it felt like our souls were miles apart. The song, meant to be a celebration of our love, seemed to mock me instead. So, Mrs. Chloe, ready for forever? Jack asked as the music faded away, his words echoing in the space between us. If forever was going to be like today, I thought. Then I didn't know. But all I said was, yes, ready as I'll ever be, praying that the dark cloud hanging over us would lift and that this bizarre start would just be a blip in our forever. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a saga that would test not just our marriage, but the very essence of who I was seemed to be under attack. As everyone raised their glasses to toast our new beginning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already ended. After the wedding, we returned to my cozy 3-bedroom house, bought with years of hard work. It was meant to be our safe haven, a fresh start for a lifetime together. Little did I know, those walls would soon feel like a prison, a stage for domestic battles. The invasion started subtly. Linda, who lived just 15 minutes away, began dropping by uninvited. She never missed a chance to criticize me, my cooking, the arrangement of the living room, even the color of the bathroom tiles. Why can't you make anything other than this tasteless pasta? She scoffed during one visit. Jack would weakly intervene, but it felt like he did it more for show than genuine concern. Linda's visits became more frequent, almost like clockwork, each one marking her territory with a snide comment. But the biggest shock came when she arrived one afternoon with suitcases and an air of entitlement that could suffocate anyone within a mile radius. "I'll be living with you now," she declared, pushing past me to claim my cozy reading nook as her own. My heart sank. I looked at Jack, silently pleading for him to say something to stop this. This was our home, our decisions to make together. "Jack, can I talk to you for a moment?" I managed to pull him aside, my voice trembling. "We should have discussed this before any decision was made." He looked at me, his eyes void of the love and support I desperately craved. "I thought I had seen just a few months ago. Mom's getting older, Chloe. She shouldn't be alone. She should be with family," he said, emphasizing the word family as if I weren't considered part of it. "So I'm not family? Is that what you're saying?" I questioned, feeling the hot sting of tears starting to form. "You know that's not what I mean," he retorted, clearly exasperated. "But Mom has done a lot for me, and I owe her this much." "What about what we owe each other? We just got married, Jack. This is supposed to be our time to grow as a couple, not play house with your mom." But my arguments fell on deaf ears. The decision was made just like that. My opinion, my feelings, my home, none of it seemed to matter. And so Linda moved in, turning the love nest I had envisioned into a battlefield of egos, tensions, and outright hostility. Every room in the house felt heavier, suffocated by her presence. I could no longer find a quiet corner to read, a peaceful moment to reflect, or even a loving glance from the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. That's how I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my home. I was fighting for my identity, my dignity, and my peace of mind. All the while, a single thought echoed through my head. How did it come to this? How did my life, my home, my choices become secondary to the whims of someone else? My reading nook was now a shrine to Linda's possessions, my kitchen a stage for her criticisms, and my husband, well, he was a stranger siding with the enemy, and all of this was just the beginning. If I thought life was hard before, it was nothing compared to the living nightmare that followed. The atmosphere in the house grew denser each day, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. What made it even worse was the undeniable 2 blue lines on the pregnancy test I held in my trembling hands. I had always imagined sharing the news of my first pregnancy as a moment of joy, an occasion to be cherished. But as I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, eyes red from restrained tears, I realized this milestone had turned into a millstone around my neck. When I told Jack about the pregnancy, his response was as lackluster as ever. "Well, that's something," he mumbled before quickly changing the topic to discuss a home improvement project his mother had suggested. It was Linda, of course, who took control of my pregnancy as though it were her divine mission. She began dictating my diet, my activities, and even the hospital where I would deliver, but her intrusion didn't stop at unsolicited advice. She managed to turn my pregnancy into another battleground for her psychological warfare. "You're eating again," she would say, her eyes darting towards the modest sandwich I'd made for myself. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy? This is doctor recommended." "Linda," I'd reply, mustering all the patience I had left, "doctors these days know what they're talking about. Back in my time, we knew how to handle pregnancies." And so it continued. As the weeks went by, my energy waned, but Linda's expectations soared. She turned my home into her personal palace, ordering me to clean, cook, and cater to her needs as if I were a servant rather than a daughter-in-law, and a pregnant one at that. "Chloe, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" She'd yell from her self-assigned throne, my old reading nook where she'd spend hours scrolling through her phone or watching daytime TV. "I've been feeling really tired today, Linda. The doctor advised me to take it easy," I'd say, my voice tinged with desperation. "Tired? Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know." Jack once again remained conspicuously silent, his compliance deafening. The tension reached a breaking point during another heated dinner discussion, where Linda decided to critique my choice of baby names. "That's a ridiculous name for a child. You might as well pin a 'kick me' sign on his back for his entire school life." Linda sneered. "Enough is enough, Linda. This is my child, and I have a say in how to raise him or her, I snapped, my patience finally depleted. Oh, so now you're talking back to me? Linda's eyes flared, her voice escalating. Jack intervened, but not in the way I had hoped. Chloe, you're being emotional. Mom's just giving her opinion, he said. I looked at him, then at Linda, and then at the house that had turned into a nightmare. I felt trapped, humiliated, and utterly alone. I could barely recognize the woman staring back at me in the reflection of my tarnished wedding ring, a woman who was slowly losing everything she had once valued, her home, her dignity, and most devastatingly, her will to fight. And that's when it happened, the ultimate betrayal. Linda, filled with venomous triumph, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you can't handle a simple family discussion, maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family." And Jack, he said nothing. His silence spoke volumes, cutting deeper than any words ever could. It was in that moment I realized that my nightmare wasn't unfolding. It had already unfolded, and I was living in it. My life had become an unrecognizable maze of shattered hopes and suppressed sobs. I moved like a zombie through the rooms that no longer felt like my home. The baby inside me seemed to be the only living part of my existence, and I clung to that tiny spark of life as my last shred of hope. But even that was threatened. One cold evening marked my breaking point. We were having another one of those god-awful family dinners, where tension cut through the air like a knife. I had spent hours on my feet cooking a meal that I knew Linda would find fault with, no matter how perfect it was. Each critique was a jab, each scoff a slap. I knew another one was coming, and I braced myself for it. But when it finally came, it was worse than anything she'd said before. "You really think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household? What are you going to do with a baby?" Linda sneered. My heart sank into my stomach, each word a stab at my already fragile self-esteem. Before I could say anything, Jack joined in, sealing my emotional fate. "Mom has a point, Chloe. You need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was it, the final straw. A bolt of anger mixed with a lifetime's worth of resentment and humiliation surged through me. "Step it up? Step it up?" I shouted, surprising even myself with the intensity of my voice. "I am carrying our child for months, managing our house, and putting up with relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you tell me to step it up." Both Jack and Linda looked stunned, but I was on a roll, a volcano finally erupting after years of suppression. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice cracking. "I won't raise my child in an environment where their mother is treated like dirt. If you two are what family means, then I don't want any part of it." And with that, I left the table, leaving them both in speechless disbelief. I packed a small bag and headed for the door, my trembling hands struggling to turn the doorknob. That's when Linda decided to deliver her ultimate blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Jack's house, not yours." I turned around, my eyes locking onto hers. "Actually, Linda, this is my house. I bought it, and I have every right to say who stays and who leaves." "Chloe, don't do this. Let's talk about it," Jack pleaded, finally realizing the gravity of what was happening. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, tears streaming down my face. With that, I stepped out into the frigid night air. No coat, no plan, just an overwhelming urge to escape. As the door shut behind me, it felt like a closing chapter, the final act of a tragedy that had stretched on for too long. I began to walk, each step a painful reminder of the life I was leaving behind. I had no idea where I was going, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my destiny. But the cost of my newfound freedom was agonizingly high. The icy wind pierced through my thin clothes as I trudged along the deserted streets. I had walked for what felt like miles, lost in a haze of emotional and physical exhaustion. I was almost there, almost at my parents' house, a sanctuary from the hell my life had become, when my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement. I stumbled, twisting my ankle painfully as I fell to the ground. The pain was sharp, but it couldn't match the ache in my heart. Limping and teary-eyed, I finally made it to my parents' doorstep. The look of horror on their faces as they opened the door told me everything I needed to know. My breaking point had come, a long overdue fracture in a life burdened with far too many cracks. And as they rushed me to the hospital, I knew something had to change. I couldn't go back, not to the house, not to Jack, and certainly not to the woman I had become. Hospital rooms have a peculiar way of forcing reality upon you. As I lay there, my sprained ankle elevated, and my body checked for any complications due to my fall, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. My parents were there, their faces etched with concern and quiet fury over what had transpired. They'd always suspected that my marriage was far from ideal, but the depths of its dysfunction had finally been laid bare. "Close, sweetheart. What are you going to do now?" My mom finally broke the silence, her voice heavy with worry. "I don't know, Mom. But what I do know is that I can't go back to that life. Not now, not ever," I replied, my own voice firmer than I expected. My dad, who had been pacing the room, finally spoke. "Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, but you need to think about your future and the future of your child." I nodded. I had been doing nothing but thinking, my mind a labyrinth of potential scenarios, each one fraught with uncertainty but also tinged with the promise of freedom. It was then that my phone buzzed. A text from Jack. "Chloe, where are you? We need to talk." Ignoring the text, I switched off my phone. Whatever he had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done talking. My actions would speak louder than his words ever could. My first move was a call to a family lawyer, a decisive step in putting an end to my disastrous marriage. With my parents by my side, we discussed divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was something chillingly clinical about dissecting a failed relationship in legal terms, but it also instilled in me a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, making choices that prioritized my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Jack and Linda were served divorce papers and a notice of eviction from the house, my house. The lawyer also included a clause for hefty child support payments and financial compensation for the emotional distress I had endured. It felt drastic, but it was necessary. It was my first step towards reclaiming my life. The darkness had consumed me, and towards a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of something better. The courtroom had that sterile, cold air that seems exclusive to places where lives can change in an instant. My lawyer sat next to me, a stack of papers in front of her, radiating confidence. My parents were behind me, their moral support palpable across the room. Jack sat with a look of defeated bewilderment, his mother Linda beside him, her face a mask of indignant disbelief. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Morrison entered the room. The divorce proceeding was a whirlwind of legalese, a barrage of facts and accusations laid bare for the court to dissect. As the evidence of Linda's abusive behavior and Jack's neglect was presented, I watched their faces contort, perhaps truly seeing themselves for the first time through the eyes of the law and through my eyes. The judge turned to Linda. "Mrs. Davis, you stand accused of emotional abuse and harassment. The evidence is overwhelming. How do you plead?" Your Honor, this is all taken out of context. I was only looking out for my son's well-being," Linda stammered, her voice lacking its usual arrogance. "It appears your definition of well-being is quite twisted," Judge Morrison retorted, clearly unimpressed. Finally, the judge rendered her verdict. "The court hereby grants Chloe Davis a full divorce from Jack Davis. Custody of the unborn child will be given to Chloe. Jack Davis, you are required to pay child support as determined by the state. And Mrs. Linda Davis, considering the extensive evidence of your emotional abuse and harassment, I'm fining you $100,000 for your actions." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as the gavel came down, but it was a bittersweet relief. My marriage had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet rustling of legal papers. I was free, but at a cost I never could have imagined when I said, "I do." As we left the courtroom, Jack approached me, a lost look in his eyes. "Chloe, I'm so sorry. I never thought we'd end up here. I stared at him, seeing the man I had once thought I would spend my life with. And all I felt was a void where love used to be. I didn't think so either, Jack, but here we are. It's too late for sorry now, I said, turning my back on him and walking away. Linda tried to make eye contact as I passed her, perhaps seeking some form of acknowledgement or forgiveness, but I gave her none. She had taken so much had been taken from me, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she still mattered. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun seemed a little brighter, the world a bit more colorful. It was as if I was seeing everything through new eyes, not clouded by constant anxiety and emotional distress. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me, one written on my own terms. My mother hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Chloe. You're free, and it's all thanks to you and Dad." "I couldn't have gone through this without your support," I replied, grateful beyond words. "We'll always be here for you," Dad said, joining in the group hug. That night, I sat alone in my house, the house that was now truly mine, and felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, the only expectations I had to live up to were my own. I was still apprehensive about the challenges that lay ahead. After all, I was going to be a single mother with all the responsibilities that entailed. But as I touched my belly, feeling the gentle stirrings of my unborn child, I knew we would be okay. My painful journey had led me to this reckoning, and while scars remained, they were now a part of a story of survival, not defeat. I was ready for whatever came next, not because I had to be, but because I chose to be. And that made all the difference. My mother-in-law surprised me by saying that she and my husband are moving out, leaving me to take care of my father-in-law forever. It shocked me. It basically means she's supporting my husband, who's having an affair. They plan to live with his mistress, where my father-in-law, who needs care, also lives. Despite this, they're ignoring his needs. I'm angry at their actions, but I can't just leave my father-in-law alone. Then, unexpectedly, my father-in-law stands up, breaking his wheelchair-bound state. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Linda, almost 30 years old, married to Tom for 3 years. We used to enjoy each other's company, but lately, things have felt dull. Maybe it's what they call being too comfortable. We've settled into a routine, but it feels repetitive. About a year ago, Tom's work got busier, and he started going on business trips, which never happened before. Although he provides for us financially, and I have a job too, I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. Even when he's home, our connection seems strained. Others might think we've fallen out of love. But that's not the end of the story. For us, this was just how our marriage worked. Even though every day felt the same, it was normal for us. Then, one day, I came home from work to find my husband there, much earlier than usual. He usually never gets home before 10 p.m., but it was only 7 p.m. "Welcome home," he said, which was odd. So, I asked him why he was home so early. He explained that his dad had been in an accident at work and was in the hospital. Apparently, his dad's car was hit by another car running a red light, leaving him paralyzed in both legs and one arm. Thankfully, his life wasn't in danger, but he'd have to use a wheelchair from now on. It was devastating news. My father-in-law, who loved outdoor activities like hiking and fishing, now had to rely on a wheelchair. He was always so helpful and treated me like his own daughter. Seeing him in this condition was heartbreaking. My husband's mom called him about the accident since he works for a different company than his dad. He's frustrated because he can't visit his dad right away. And I'm saddened by the fact that such a kind man ended up in a wheelchair because of an accident. But there was no time to be shocked. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Linda, Mom has a favor to ask about Dad." "What did she ask?" I replied. "She's asking if we can help take care of him together." Take care of Dad together. Yeah, Mom's getting older, and it might be tough for her to do it alone. So she thinks it would be a big help if we both chip in. So, basically, we have to move to your parents' house? Yeah, we'll have to. There's enough space for us there. Is that okay? I couldn't answer. I cared a lot about my father-in-law, and I loved him. But agreeing to suddenly take on caregiving, something I'd never done before, was difficult. I know it's new and tough, my husband said, holding my hand. But if we leave it all to Mom, she might struggle too. Please, Linda, I know it's hard, but if we work together, we can do it. It's going to be hard, I replied, but I have a job too. I want you to quit your job and focus on caring for Dad with Mom. I'll take care of the expenses. Quit my job? I was taken aback. Yes, I'll support you financially. Dad in his wheelchair and Mom need your help. Seeing him so desperate, it was hard to refuse, so I quit my job as he suggested and started caring for my father-in-law. As time passed, one evening during dinner, my husband suddenly stood up. I decided to take over Dad's company and become the president, he announced. My father-in-law was surprised but inwardly pleased. With tears in his eyes, he said, "Tom, I can't believe you do this. You always said you wouldn't work at my company." I was just embarrassed. But in this condition, I can't leave the company alone, can I? Thank you, my father-in-law said, relieved. I was worried about the future of the company. I'm glad to leave it in trusted hands. But when Tom said, "I want to leave it to you," my father-in-law replied, "I knew you'd say yes. I'll do my best as a son. Please create a good working environment for my employees," my father-in-law added. Of course, Tom assured him. After this exchange, Tom became the president of his father's company, while his father-in-law took on the role of chairman. Despite the typical image of a chairman being associated with retirement, there was still a lot of work to be done. However, my father-in-law left the actual operation of the company in Tom's hands. Within just 2 months of taking over as president, Tom started coming home late every night. Initially, I thought it was because he was still getting used to the job, but it seemed strange to work overtime consistently for 2 months. Another reason for my suspicions arose from the smell Tom had when he returned home. One night, unable to sleep, I heard him come in. He smelled of soap, which was unusual. When I questioned him, he became defensive, blaming his late nights on taking over his father's business. But as he hurried to bed, I couldn't shake off my unease. His evasiveness only heightened my suspicions. When I tried to ask him more questions, he became irritated, brushing off my concerns. Something didn't add up, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. As I arrived home tired, I didn't mean to accuse him of anything. I was just curious. But Tom took it as an accusation of cheating. He argued that he's working hard every day so I can live comfortably. I understood his point, but I still felt uneasy. When I tried to apologize, he ignored me and went upstairs, deliberately making noise. In the bedroom, he turned away from me and started using his smartphone. The next day, my mother-in-law, informed by Tom about our argument, approached me angrily. She accused me of suspecting Tom of cheating just because he works hard for me. I tried to explain that I was only curious, but she insisted it was wrong to make Tom uncomfortable. She left, leaving all the housework for me to do. My mother-in-law doesn't think highly of me, despite pretending to share the housework. In reality, I do everything, including taking care of my father-in-law. During the day, she finds excuses to go out, returning only in the evening. My father-in-law, mostly staying in his room, doesn't realize how often she's gone. She's even warned me not to say anything odd to my father-in-law and Tom, further straining our relationship. I felt the unfairness of my self-centered mother-in-law, but all I could do was silently carry on with the housework and caregiving. However, the reason I could endure such a life was mainly because of my father-in-law. Every time I helped him, he genuinely apologized. "Linda, I'm sorry. I'm sure you'd hate taking care of an old man like me," he'd say. "Don't worry about it. I think of you as my real father. I'm happy to help," I'd reply. "I'm glad that Tom married someone like you, Linda. Despite all the trouble I've caused you with my care, you still speak so kindly to me." "I'm a lucky man," he'd express gratefully. "I'm also happy to have such a kind person as my father-in-law," I'd assure him. Despite feeling uncomfortable due to my husband and mother-in-law's behavior, I kept going because of my father-in-law's kindness. My routine involved helping my father-in-law before bed and then turning off the lights. One day, when I finished and returned to the living room, my usually absent husband was there, talking to my mother-in-law. Something felt off, and my fears were confirmed when my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Good timing, Linda. We need to talk. Please take care of James here for the rest of his life," she said. Confused, I asked what she meant. But before I could fully grasp the situation, my husband handed me divorce papers. "I have someone else, and we're leaving to live with her. You can deal with the divorce papers," he said coldly. Stunned and devastated, I collapsed as they packed their bags and left, ignoring my tears. Alone in the silent living room, tears streamed down my cheeks. Then, my father-in-law appeared in his wheelchair. "Linda, what happened?" "I heard noise and came to see," he asked, concerned. I struggled to find words, my heart heavy with pain and confusion. I confided in my father-in-law about what had happened earlier. His expression grew stern as he listened, and by the end, his eyes burned with determination. Suddenly, he stood up, his voice commanding like never before. "Linda, let's fight back," he said firmly. Concerned, I glanced at his legs, but he apologized for keeping it a secret and revealed that he could walk. Assuring me not to worry, he declared he was ready. From a drawer, he produced a large envelope, revealing its contents, evidence of my husband's infidelity and even my mother-in-law's. Shocked, I learned that since becoming president, Tom left work exactly on time every day, despite returning home well after midnight. Suspicious, my father-in-law had hired a private investigator to look into him, uncovering his affair. Additionally, my mother-in-law's daytime absences were also investigated, leading to the discovery of her own infidelity. Astonishingly, she seemed aware of Tom's affair, as evidenced by photos of them together. My father-in-law had recently obtained this evidence and debated when to tell me. "It's not right to say this," he began, "but I believe it's time to confront them." "I'm glad I could tell you," I replied to my father-in-law's support. "I can't stand it like this. I want to fight back." "Leave the rest to me," he'd assured me, promptly making a call to someone from the company. As a result, my husband was ousted from his position as president. Following my father-in-law's advice, I filed for divorce and demanded division of property from Tom through my lawyer. About a week later, Tom visited my parents-in-law's house. Outraged, he confronted me and my father-in-law, demanding to know why his infidelity led to losing his presidency. My father-in-law didn't hold back, blaming him for neglecting his care duties and causing me suffering. He disowned Tom, forbidding him from ever entering the house again. Desperate, Tom begged me to persuade my father-in-law to forgive him and withdraw the divorce. He promised to end his affair and drop the demand for division of property. His selfishness disappointed me. Despite everything, he only thought of himself. "To withdraw the divorce," I repeated, incredulous. At this point, what are you even saying? I never asked for that. I'm glad to be divorced from a scumbag like you. I'm not going back to you ever again, I asserted firmly. Of course, why should I have to be married to a scumbag like you? Your divorce and being ousted as president are your own doing. It's the seeds you sowed. Confused and desperate, Tom tried to backtrack, claiming the divorce papers were just a threat. "I thought so," I retorted. "You, your mother, your mistress. I hope you all go to hell together. Keep holding onto your spoiled ideas of getting help from someone." I chased him out of the front door, slamming it shut. From outside, I could hear Tom's wails begging for forgiveness, but neither my father-in-law nor I responded. Learning that Tom was ousted as president, his mistress promptly threw both him and his mother out of the house. With nowhere else to go, they were forced to live in a cheap motel for a few days. Losing their jobs depleted their savings, and they struggled to make ends meet, eventually going into debt. Working as day laborers, they couldn't afford rent and lived from day to day. Meanwhile, I continued to care for my father-in-law in his house. You're welcome to stay here as long as you like, he told me after the divorce. Grateful for his kindness, I decided to continue living with him. Recently, he started going to a senior daycare center, allowing me to work while he's out. Despite potential challenges in the future, I'm determined to do everything I can for him. Starting today, my husband suggested we move in with my parents. Since they're my parents, it shouldn't be a problem, right? But it caught me off guard. I was shocked and almost cried because he didn't mention it before. Just a few days ago, we said goodbye to my dad at his funeral. He had been sick for a long time. Even though we were still feeling sad from the funeral, my husband packed our things and left our house. He said we were going to a villa my dad left for me. Surprisingly, my in-laws were already there, staying in the villa. My name's Natalie. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a designer. I've been living with Justin, my husband, for 3 years since we got married. My job is going well, and I think I'm a pretty successful designer. I earn enough money to have an apartment in my name. My mom passed away when I was in college, and last year, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. He tried treatment, but it didn't work, and the doctors said we should prepare for the worst. When my mom passed away, I was already living on my own. But my dad always kept in touch, especially after I started working. He was really important to me. When I found out how sick he was, I was devastated. I worried about him all the time, and my husband kept asking me about his health. But honestly, I didn't think he really cared. It felt like he was just waiting for my dad to die. My husband always seemed insecure because he made less money than me. I wished he'd be proud of my achievements and support me when things got tough. But he acted childish. He was always competing and only seemed happy when he was winning. My dad told us not to worry about him and to focus on our relationship, but I thought we should spend time with him while we still could. That way, we wouldn't regret it later. I started to resent my husband more and more. In the beginning of our marriage, he was loving and caring, but his insensitive comments about my dad's illness hurt too much. I couldn't believe how much he changed. My husband works from home, and he said having me around distracts him. So I rented an office and started commuting. Even though I was busy with work and taking care of my dad, my husband didn't help with anything at home. He lived selfishly and didn't care about my feelings. Living with him made me realize how little he understood me, and I felt really lonely. Then my dad died. We had already sold our family home, so I was busy with funeral arrangements, but my husband was always on the phone or disappearing. He didn't seem interested in helping me at all. I begged him to help, especially during such a hard time. But he just brushed me off, saying he was getting a lot of work calls. I was so angry and disappointed in him. Losing my dad made me feel even more hurt by his coldness. On the day of the funeral, I felt incredibly sad. After spending a long time talking with his parents, my husband came back smirking. Their suspicious looks made me feel even more alone. But despite that, the cremation, interment, and inheritance stuff went smoothly, and the funeral ended well. Then, out of the blue, my husband suggested we move in with my parents. He said, "They're your parents, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? If you're against it, should we get divorced?" He said it like it was a joke, but I couldn't stay calm. I strongly opposed the idea, especially since we didn't have any extra rooms in our apartment. One room was used as my workspace and for storing my husband's work stuff. But he just smiled and said we should live in the villa I inherited. It was a special place for me, filled with memories of my dad. I wanted to keep it that way, but my husband didn't seem to care. He kept making selfish demands. I tried to explain that living there would be tough, but he wouldn't listen. His parents had already decided to move there. They probably planned it during the funeral. Since the villa was big and peaceful, they liked it. Their move was already in progress, and I couldn't object. Every time I spoke up, my husband got mad. He accused me of only thinking about myself and being absent from home. Because of your father's illness and all those sudden calls, do you even realize how much I've put up with? Your obsession with your father has been too much to handle. His words were harsh, and I felt like my world was falling apart. Now that your father's gone, You need to listen to me. It took him a whole year to die, which was way too long," he continued, his tone cold and heartless. I couldn't believe this was the man I married. He showed no respect for my father or me. I remembered how my dad looked in pain in his hospital bed. He wouldn't have wanted me to just obey my husband like this. In that moment, I realized all my love for my husband had disappeared. It hurt to think about how he found joy in getting the villa while I was mourning my father's death. But I held back my emotions and warned him about regretting his decision. I packed the essentials and left our home, leaving my husband puzzled. I didn't want to say anything more to him. It was painful to see my in-laws, who probably couldn't wait for my father to die so they could move in. But I followed my husband silently. The only thing I couldn't accept was him taking over my special place. The villa, although technically a villa, was just a regular home by the sea, where ordinary people lived. However, the villa's location was quite convenient, being easily accessible from the city center, and the land itself held considerable value. As I stepped out of the station, the familiar scenery of my childhood greeted me. I remembered how my mother used to be alive, and whenever I dozed off on the train, my father would carry me on his back all the way home. When we reached the villa, my in-laws were already inside. I started to suspect something fishy, realizing that my husband had secretly given them a key without my knowledge. This made me even more uneasy, sensing a secret plan to move in without my consent. Looking around the villa, I saw my in-laws' eyes shining with excitement for their future life here. Despite being a single-family home, the sturdy furniture my father had chosen was arranged in a slightly different European style, probably to my mother's taste. But their ecstatic comments irritated me. They seemed to underestimate the significance of my father's passing, seeing the villa merely as a luxurious house. Their lack of sensitivity became even more apparent when my husband joined in, laughing as they opened beers to toast the move. I sighed deeply, feeling the precious memories I shared with my parents at the dining table being tainted. I decided to hide my feelings and endure the night. The next morning, my mother-in-law's scream shattered the quiet atmosphere of the villa, instantly alerting me. When I woke up, I noticed my father-in-law and husband causing a commotion, but it took me a moment to reach the source of the scream. In the bathroom, my mother-in-law was on the floor, clutching her foot with a panicked expression. She explained that the floor had given way beneath her, but when my husband and father-in-law checked, everything seemed fine. As they examined the floor, I suggested they try stepping on a slightly differently colored part. When they did, the floorboard made a sound and slightly sunk, but then snapped back into place when lifted. I explained that it was intentional, part of what my father called a mechanical mansion or a trick house. He was a huge ninja enthusiast, and this villa was his pride and joy. He had installed traps and mechanisms throughout the villa, including floorboards that seemed to collapse but were actually harmless. As someone familiar with the house since childhood, I had no trouble navigating it, but my husband and in-laws, being unfamiliar, were shocked. They hadn't realized what they were getting into by moving here. With our apartment lease canceled and nowhere else to go, they were pressing my husband on what to do next. In the midst of this, both my father-in-law and husband accidentally triggered another trap, causing them to fall. "Please feel free to stay as long as you like," I said, but my tone was more mocking than genuine. They had been so enchanted by the luxury of the villa, ignoring my warnings and showing no interest in my father's hobbies. Now their oversight was coming back to bite them. Even when I explained the dangers of the traps, they didn't take it seriously. "We'll get used to it," my husband said confidently. "I'll head back to the apartment to prepare for our move," I replied, leaving them in the villa. But in reality, I had no moving preparations. I planned to take a few days off and sort through my father's belongings. As expected, after just 2 days, my husband and in-laws had had enough. Meanwhile, I found solace being by myself and could slowly regain a positive outlook, planning my new life. Before long, my father's villa became a minor tourist attraction in the neighborhood. It was regularly featured in local newsletters as the trick mansion hidden in a residential area. Reflecting on this, I remembered strangers touring the villa and local children playing there, making it a lively spot. Since my upbringing had made me proficient in foreign languages, I could manage calls from foreign visitors. But my husband and in-laws couldn't understand foreign languages at all. Along with the nerve-wracking lifestyle of constantly worrying about the traps, they were overwhelmed by unexpected visitors and handling calls in foreign languages. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, they stumbled back to the apartment. "Why don't we all live in this apartment together?" "Think about it," I suggested. They had longed for my father's demise to get their hands on the villa, only to give it up in just 2 days. Instead of serving them tea, I handed my husband the divorce papers, already filled out and stamped in my section. "There's no way we can live together. If you understand, just leave quickly," I explained with a deep sigh. I couldn't forgive him for disregarding my feelings and acting insensitively without consulting me or giving any explanation. My husband decided we'd live with his parents. Moreover, he had never shared household responsibilities with me before. He dumped all the household responsibilities onto me, and when I felt cornered, he seemed indifferent about it. He ignored my feelings, acted selfishly, and secretly decided to move in with his parents. I couldn't imagine continuing to live with someone like that. "What happened? You used to love me, right?" he asked obliviously. I couldn't help but laugh at his usual oblivious remarks. "You think I could love someone who wished for my beloved father's early death and would rejoice when he passed?" I handed him only the divorce papers and drove them out of the apartment. "First of all, this is my apartment. If you have a problem, you should be the one to leave." My husband raised his voice, but I responded calmly, reminding him that the apartment was under my name. They fell silent upon hearing my words. They relied on me financially and didn't have much of their own. However, I had made up my mind to cut ties before their lengthy persuasions began. Neither my husband nor my in-laws had much in savings after being evicted from the apartment and being unable to return to the villa. They now live in a cheap, low-quality apartment and are barely getting by. At first, my husband felt guilty and apologized frequently, but over time, he grew resentful of his parents. Due to their age, they rarely worked, and when they did, it didn't last long. In the end, they exhausted their savings and pension with every move, constantly argued, and became estranged as a family. The walls of the apartment were thin, letting out their daily quarrels. Even when they received noise complaints, they didn't apologize. Instead, they retaliated, causing them to be disliked by their neighbors. They might need to find a new place to live soon. My husband previously enjoyed working from home, but in the current apartment, he didn't have the luxury of a dedicated workspace. Unable to concentrate on his job, his reputation and sales plummeted. Now, he barely gets by with a late-night convenience store job and should consider juggling multiple part-time jobs. The in-laws felt their biggest mistake was letting their son control their decisions. In their frequent arguments, they blamed the villa's traps. "If you had been more responsible, we wouldn't be in this situation," they argued. "You should have checked properly." "Don't blame me now," my husband countered. "I never imagined we'd end up like this because of our son," she said, reflecting on how her parents had always wished to inherit the villa and were overjoyed when her father passed away. I will never forget that after the divorce, I made significant strides in my career as a designer. To process her father's death and all these events, she created designs incorporating ninja elements and showcased them on social media. Their popularity spread rapidly, and one day a major cosmetics company contacted her to design packaging with an Asian touch incorporating ninja elements. She felt this work would preserve her father's cherished memories. Of course, I eagerly took on this project and committed fully to it. Ultimately, it was a huge success, propelling my career forward and allowing me to give joyful updates at my parents' graves. She retained the mechanical house, keeping it as a special place filled with memories of her father. She began organizing tour schedules and, with a little tweaking, turned it into a space where both tourists and local children could enjoy for free. Soon, the house attracted significant media attention, and the income from this exposure helped to defray ongoing costs. Furthermore, online articles about the house were translated into foreign languages, leading to support from international fans. Some of the donations even came from elderly folks who shared my father's passion for ninjas. She remained dedicated to the ongoing upkeep of this magical place. Meanwhile, the mechanical house remained a daily hub of activity, a favorite among local children. Although I lost my father and the inheritance of the villa resulted in my divorce, I feel the gains have been greater than the losses, she reflected. The villa has transformed into a memory-rich location shared with family and friends. I've also undergone a personal transformation, moving forward with renewed optimism and hope. That house is mine because I built it. You need to leave now, even if we split. I don't think you can survive on your part-time salary. Steve laughed as he happily laid out the divorce papers. My name is Katie. I'm 33 years old. Recently, I started working part-time at a nearby supermarket. I married Steve 3 years ago after we hit it off at the same workplace. I resigned at the same time. I wanted to keep working even after getting married, but he insisted that I stay home. So, I reluctantly became a full-time housewife. However, I had always loved working, and the desire to work outside kept growing day by day. After much persuasion, I finally managed to get a part-time job. We want children but haven't been blessed with any yet. I love cats and wanted to get a pet. But Steve hates cats, so I reluctantly gave up on the idea. Steve, who originally wanted me to be a full-time housewife, didn't like that I started working part-time and started complaining about everything I did. You went to your job again today, huh? Recently, the house seems to be getting dirtier. Aren't the laundry clothes all wrinkled? You're not keeping up with the housework at all. That wasn't true. I had finished cleaning before going to work, and the laundry was perfectly stretched out. What are you talking about? I'm doing everything as perfectly as before. It's obviously dirty. Where are your eyes? And the food is always the same. Fried chicken again. Today, can't you make a variety of dishes? I didn't make fried chicken that often, and I tried to be creative with the meals every day despite the limited time. I've worked hard to make your favorite fried chicken, and I've prepared many dishes. When I talked back a little, he would return with double the intensity. Are you saying you don't have time because of your part-time job? You just pretend to be busy. Don't act so important with just a small job that doesn't even make much money. My earnings were enough in the first place, and it's only because of your selfishness that you're working. Make sure you do the housework properly. Don't make excuses about not having time. It's shameful to sweat and work for such a low hourly wage. Steve always ridiculed my job with abusive words. He had said that he wanted me to be a housewife because he didn't want others to think we were struggling financially. For the sake of his own image, he mocked my part-time work every chance he got, boasting that he made enough money that we didn't need to worry about living expenses. No matter that he was my husband, being demeaned for my work with such horrible words was something even I cannot tolerate. I was infuriated by his words every day. One day we decided to go for a drive to visit Steve's parents' home, where we hadn't been for a while. Although I have been irritated with Steve for a long time, I was happy to go out for a change, since it had been a while. At that time, I had no idea what would happen at my in-laws' house. After driving for a few hours, we arrived at Steve's parents' home, where his mother, who lived alone, greeted us with a smile. After dinner, which she had prepared, Steve went out to play slots. While doing the dishes with my mother-in-law, her demeanor seemed to change. She was no longer the calm person she had been, and her face became stern as I made coffee, wondering what was wrong. We sat on the sofa, and she began to speak. Katie, according to Steve, you're working a part-time job. Why do you need to work when he is working so respectably? Also, I hear that you're not managing the housework because you don't have enough time or something due to your part-time job. I was a bit surprised by her sudden words. No, that's not true. I'm managing everything properly. My mother-in-law, with exaggerated surprise, said, "Oh, I've heard from Steve all about how terrible you were at housework. Lying is useless. He has been enduring this alone. He's tired from work, and it's really pitiful that he has to return to a house full of garbage. You're not making decent meals, are you? Quit that part-time job. No one at your workplace will care if you're not there. They can just hire someone else. Your job is to take care of the house. All right, from now on, focus on the house and properly support Steve. Really, don't embarrass yourself as Steve's wife. My mother-in-law has old-fashioned beliefs, thinking that a wife should stay at home. She got married right after finishing school and has never worked, always being a full-time housewife. Steve also grew up believing that's how a wife should be. That's why both of them dislike the idea of me working outside. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law's words were too harsh. She not only dismissed the job I was working so hard at, but also crudely said that no one would be troubled if I quit. Those heartless words deeply upset me. My part-time job was fulfilling, and everyone was kind. The atmosphere was very positive. Everyone treated me well and relied on me. It was heartbreaking to be spoken about as if I were unnecessary, while she doesn't even know any of this. It was also quite a shock to discover that Steve had been bad-mouthing me behind my back, even though I did take care of our home properly. In fact, I had been working harder than ever on the household chores so that they didn't get neglected because of my part-time job. I knew his job was tough, so I was trying my best to accommodate that. But Steve and his mother were bad-mouthing me over the phone. I didn't want to believe it. After being told such awful things, I was very down for a few days. But then I suddenly remembered my father's face. Since my mother passed away, my father had been living alone in our family home. He lived a bit far from me, and I hadn't visited him recently because I have been busy. I wanted to hear my father's voice, so I called him. Usually, he answers the phone quickly, but that day, the ring went on for a long time. Just as I started to worry, he finally answered. "Katie, it's been a while. Are you well?" Hearing my father's calm voice, I was so relieved that tears started to flow. "What happened? You took a while to answer the phone." "If you're busy, I can call back later," he said, seeming to catch his breath. "No, I'm sorry. I fell down the stairs recently and hurt my back. I can't move around much now. But don't worry about me. I'll be fine soon. By the way, what's up? Is anything wrong?" I was really surprised. My father, who used to be so athletic, had fallen down the stairs and hurt his back. "No, I'm fine. Just make sure to take care of yourself and get better soon. I'll come to visit you soon, so wait for me." "Yeah, I'm okay," he replied. But then I thought, he's already considered elderly, and injuries might take longer to heal. I had always been reassured by his vitality, but suddenly I felt anxious. If he keeps using the stairs every day, he might slip again. Moreover, the stairs in the old family home are a bit steep, and there are high steps in the entrance and bathroom. I became very worried about my father living in that house while protecting his back. What if something happens and he gets seriously injured? I couldn't just sit still. I had always thought it would be good to live closer to him, but I realized there was no time left to hesitate. I made a major decision to build a safer, more accessible home for my father nearby. I had a source of income that I had kept hidden from my husband. I had inherited apartment management from my grandfather. It was originally meant to be my father's, but he had put it in my name in case of emergencies. He had told me it was better not to talk much about it so my husband didn't know. I had saved all the rental income up to now. I would use that money to build a new house for my father. I had caused a lot of worry and hadn't been able to do much to repay him, so now I felt elated thinking about giving my father the best gift of his life. Although I would build it myself, it would involve a lot of money, and I couldn't just keep it a secret. I needed to get Steve's understanding. I was nervous he might come, complain, and reject the idea, but instead he said, "I see. That makes sense. Considering his age, a new house might be better. If a part-timer like you can manage that, then go ahead and try. Just don't come crying to me if you can't do it." He insulted me again, which infuriated me. But arguing would only complicate things further, so I decided to hold back and not retort this time. This made things easier for me. I immediately started looking for a good contractor and moved forward with the process. It seemed that Steve was not pleased with the idea of me actually building the house. He didn't voice any complaints, so I tried not to mind it. But he was not usually the type to stay quiet. One day, I was shocked when I went to the bank to withdraw money for groceries. Our living expenses had been reduced by $3,000, withdrawn all at once. I had no recollection of spending such a large amount of money. There could only be one person who could have done this. That night, I confronted him. When I went to the bank today, I found that $3,000 had been withdrawn from our living expenses. Do you know anything about this? Steve arrogantly replied, I gave it to my mother. You said you were going to build a house, so you must have been saving up somewhere, right? $3,000 isn't a big deal. I couldn't believe my ears. Why do you have to give her money? Your mother isn't exactly broke, is she? Besides, that's our living expense. It's too selfish to give away such a large sum without even asking me. He snapped back. What do you know about my mother? She said she was struggling. What's wrong with a son helping his mother? Besides, that money was earned by me. How I use it is none of your business. If it bothers you, try earning as much as I do with your part-time job. See, you can't say anything. Don't ever complain about what I do again. After shouting at me, he stormed out of the room. I had always believed that despite his harsh words, Steve would never betray me. It would have been better if he had just discussed it with me. If he wanted to give money to his mother, maybe there would have been a better way, and this argument might have been avoided. Did he think I would oppose it, or did he not trust me? Instead of our marriage bringing us closer, it felt like our hearts were drifting apart. Steve didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with using the money without consent, and the next day, he acted as if nothing had happened and went to work after breakfast. I didn't say more because I didn't want another argument, but I couldn't shake off my uneasy feeling. Meanwhile, the new house was finally completed. Despite the hustle, the kind construction company provided lots of support, and I managed to build a beautiful house. I had asked my father to pack up some of his things but not overexert himself, and I arranged for movers to handle everything for him. With just 2 weeks left until moving day, I was overflowing with joy at the thought of doing something filial for my father in the house I had built. On the day, I planned to help my father unpack in the new house along with Steve. When I tried to discuss the arrangements for the day, Steve said something unbelievable. Hey, that house isn't for your father. It's going to be for my mother. I have the right to decide who lives in the house I built, so it's going to be my mother who lives there. I couldn't understand what he was saying. In a panic, I responded, I built that house. It's for my father to live in. There's no way a part-timer like you could build a house. It's my money that built it, so don't get cocky. It seems he truly believed that it was his money that built the house. When I discussed building the house the other day, he easily accepted my idea. Was it because he planned from the start to make it for his mother, not my father? That's a terrible way to do things. Now, I had to prove that I built it with my money. I had no choice but to tell him about the rental income I had kept secret until now. I made up my mind to tell him about it. You made up a ridiculous story just because you want the house. House it as you like. If you're going to lie, at least make it a decent one. He didn't believe me at all and went somewhere. I was at a loss but had no choice but to explain until he understood. As I waited for him to return, he came back with an incredibly grim expression and then blurted out, Hey, you tried to deceive me, claiming you built that house. You're a liar. That house is mine because I built it. You need to leave now. Even if we split, I don't think you can survive on your part-time salary. I was at a loss for words due to the suddenness of it all. That house was built by me, and besides, telling me to leave so suddenly was too much. Sign this and get out tonight. He laughed as he slammed the divorce papers on the table and went to his room. His section was already filled out. After continually belittling me, presenting the divorce papers like that was truly the lowest he could stoop. He must have done this terrible thing to drive me to despair. He probably thought that by bringing up divorce, I would give in and let his mother live in that house. But unfortunately for him, I had enough income to live on my own without him. This act of his was the last straw for me. I signed the divorce papers and submitted them, then hurriedly packed my bags and left the house to go to my father's home. My father was surprised to see me arriving suddenly with big luggage, but he warmly let me come in. After I told him everything that had happened up to today, he patted my back and said, "You've had a tough time. Then you can live with me in the new house." That would make me happy. The moving day arrived, and everything went smoothly because I was there. We successfully moved in without any problems. I found it a bit eerie that my ex-husband hadn't made any contacts after making such a fuss, claiming the house was his. But I tried not to worry because I didn't want to think about someone I was divorced from. Then, a few days after starting life in the new house with my father, something unbelievable happened. It was noisy outside, and when I looked out the window, I saw a large moving truck stopped, claiming they were moving to this house. I hurried to the mover and asked what was happening. It turned out the customer was actually my ex-husband, and he would soon arrive with his mother to move in. They planned to forcibly move into this house where my father and I were already living. Since we were divorced, he was a complete stranger, and it would be troublesome if they just showed up. Feeling a creepy kind of fear about my ex-husband's forceful intentions, I explained the situation to the confused movers and asked them to stop their work. Then I discussed it with him. My father and I hurriedly called the police. When I explained everything to them, they confirmed that the house was my property, and since my ex-husband and I were divorced, he had no rights to live here. Merely entering against my will could be considered trespassing. Then my ex-husband and his mother arrived nonchalantly. Seeing the police, they started panicking. At that moment, he finally understood that I was the one who built the house. However, with his mother panicking beside him and being bombarded with questions by the police, he had already lost his composure and shouted, "What is this? Why can't I live in this house?" Looking at him, I thought I was done dealing with such a person. But to protect my father and myself, I handed over the final weapon to the police. Although the situation calmed down thanks to the police, I heard that my ex-husband faced serious consequences. Later, he was serious about living in this house, so he had canceled his apartment lease and even sold his mother's house, leaving him with no place to return to and with a breach of contract fee demanded by the movers and a truckload of belongings. He literally found himself stranded on the street with his mother. The final weapon I handed to the police was the evidence of the verbal abuse, essentially domestic violence, that my husband had subjected me to. Having been unable to endure my husband's abusive language any longer, I had thought of getting back at him someday and had installed surveillance cameras to record everything. The footage showed me diligently doing housework and my husband constantly spouting unreasonable abuse. Using this footage, I managed to further corner my ex-husband. I hired a lawyer and sued him and was able to extract a settlement from him. The expenses from the moving chaos and the settlement I received from him depleted the money he got from selling his mother's house and his own savings. Now he and his mother are reportedly living in a rundown apartment. Word of this spread quickly at his workplace. Realizing there was something wrong with his character, his colleagues distanced themselves, and now he is isolated and frowned upon by everyone at the company. As for me, I finally got to own a cat. My father's back has completely healed, and we're discussing taking a trip with the cat. I'd also used the settlement money to open a shop dealing with cat goods. It was challenging at first, and there were failures, but gradually customers increased, and the business is doing well. Every day is peaceful and truly enjoyable. I never thought that the action I took for my father's sake would lead to my own happiness. I truly feel that it was the right decision. Recently, there has been a happy development. A man who always comes to my shop and chats pleasantly has been particularly kind to both people and cats. We've made plans to go for a drive together. I'm going to live my life freely and enjoyably. I'm excited about the new happiness that's about to begin. When I looked at my phone, I saw that my mother-in-law, Martha, had called me 13 times. I groaned to myself, realizing she was probably calling about money again. Just as I was thinking about this, my phone buzzed again. "Hello," I answered. Martha started yelling right away, demanding to know where her $3,000 allowance was for the month. I tried to explain that the money hadn't been deposited yet, that she didn't care about my situation at all. She just wanted what she wanted. I was fed up. She never thinks about how her words and actions affect others. I had no choice but to tell her the truth. Her son had passed away, so I couldn't send her any money anymore. "My name is Jennifer Smith. I'm 32 years old, and I work at a big financial company. I'd also take care of our home. I got married to Mary about 2 years ago. I met my husband, Mark, through our shared interests, and we fell in love quickly. After dating for a year, we got engaged and then married. We believed we were meant for each other, and things were going well for us. But here's where a problem came up. Martha, my mother-in-law. Mark's father had passed away a few years ago, and since Mark didn't have any siblings, Martha was his only family. The trouble started when I first visited her home to meet her before our wedding. "Nice to meet you, Martha," I said, but she didn't seem pleased. "So, you're Mark's fiancée," she said with a hint of disapproval. "Ah, yes, my name is Jennifer Miller," I replied. "You're quite plain, aren't you?" "I wonder what Mark sees in you," she said, and I couldn't tell if she was joking or serious. Her words shocked me, coming from the mother of the man I loved. Seeing my reaction, Mark frowned at his mom. "Mom, why are you being so harsh? How can you say such things about the person I chose?" he asked. "No, Mark, I'm just trying to find the right woman for you," Martha replied. "But I chose her." "You have no right to interfere," Mark insisted. The argument got tense, and I couldn't intervene since it was my first meeting with Martha. Despite the awkward atmosphere, we managed to express our intention to marry. But as we were leaving, Martha called out to Mark. "Can I have a word, Mark?" she asked, sounding a bit unhappy. "You'll still send me the allowance after you get married, right?" she asked. "What promise?" Mark replied. "You know, the allowance," Martha reminded him. "Oh, that. Yes, I'll take care of it. Can we not discuss it here, please?" Mark replied, a bit uncomfortable. The tension between my husband and his mother lingered in the car on the way home. I finally asked Mark about what had been bothering me. "Hey, Mark, about the conversation you had with your mom as we were leaving." "Yeah, I should have told you about it, Jennifer. I heard something about an allowance. After my dad passed away, I've been sending money to my mom every month." "How much?" $2,000. $2,000? I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise. He sighed deeply and began to speak slowly. "Actually, my mom has a debt. She lost a lot of money at a casino a long time ago, and she's still paying it off. And because her health isn't great these days, she spends a lot of time at home. But she still needs money to live on. But $2,000? Isn't that a bit too much? If I try to lower the amount, she keeps calling me over and over. And no matter what, a mother is still a mother. I worry about her living alone." I see, Mark is really devoted to his mother, but of course, that makes sense. Since his father passed away, Martha has been the only family he has left. Regardless of her character, she's still his beloved mother. At that time, I only thought of my husband as a kind person. 2 months after our wedding, during my lunch break one day, I received a phone call on my smartphone. The call was from Martha. When I answered with a hello, Martha began to speak in a cheerful tone. "Jennifer, long time no see. Can we chat for a bit?" "Yes. What can I do for you?" "Well, I was hoping you could start sending me money." "Excuse me?" I was so taken aback I couldn't find the words to respond. However, Martha seemed excited to continue the conversation. "You mentioned before that you're working for a financial company, right? That means you have a good salary, doesn't it?" "Well, not exactly." "What? You're lying to avoid giving me money?" "That's not what I mean." "Then what is it?" "But Martha, you're still receiving financial support from Mark, aren't you?" I asked. Martha responded defiantly, "So what?" I sternly stated what I felt. "Martha, receiving $2,000 monthly support is a big deal, and yet you're asking for more." Really? You think so? If you were to send me an additional $1,000, I could avoid burdening Mark, Martha replied. What do you mean by that? Well, I have Mark as a guarantor for my debts. If I fail to make payments, the debt collectors will go after him. Do you understand? But aren't you using part of Mark's $2,000 to pay back the debt? I'm short. I haven't told Mark. But I have a significant amount of debt. Martha confessed. Even her husband was unaware of it. Having children in the future would increase our expenses. In addition to that, taking over Martha's debt was not an easy task. But if Martha's payments fall behind and the debt falls onto Mark, the interest will likely have accumulated significantly by that time. If I refuse to send money, it would eventually become a problem for my husband as well. It was better for Martha to pay off her debt now. Thinking along those lines, I reluctantly agreed to Martha's proposal. All right, I'll start sending you money. Really? Good, Jennifer. I knew you would say that. The total, with Mark's contribution, will be $3,000. But this means you can pay off your debt, right? Martha asked eagerly. Yes, of course. I should be able to pay it all off in about a year. You promise, right? You'll make sure to pay off all your debts? I get it. So, I'll be expecting it from this month onwards. Martha ended the call abruptly. Physical exhaustion from work combined with this emotional burden only added to my stress. $1,000 a month? That's gonna be rough. But it's also to prevent future problems for us. After all, if Martha can't make a living, it will upset Mark as well. That night, I promptly reported the matter to my husband. He told me I didn't have to do this. But I had already given my word to Martha, and it was a decision made for our future well-being. Mark expressed his gratitude and understanding, even as he maintained a sorry expression throughout. Time flew by, and 2 years have passed since then. The financial aid we thought would end in a year is still ongoing, and even now, we are transferring $3,000 every month to Martha. What's more, about 2 months ago, Mark fell ill and has been unable to go to work. He's on sick leave, so he's receiving disability benefits, but it's a mere pittance compared to his previous salary. Last month, I managed to transfer $3,000 to Martha from my savings, but it would be very challenging if this situation continues. Unbelievably, Martha has not once come to visit her sick son. We have told her about his hospitalization, but she doesn't show up to see him and only contacts me to ask, "You're still sending the money, right?" I was so angry that I decided to confront Mark about the issue. Mark, listen, don't you think it's wrong that Martha is only concerned about money, even though you're in such a state? We need to think seriously about what to do going forward. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. I don't want to put more strain on you, Jennifer. This month, too, she's been bombarding me with calls and messages asking if we've sent the money yet. Are you serious? How can she only think about money when her own son is sick? Mark showed his anger at his mother, his face slightly worn. Then, as if he had an idea, Mark exclaimed, "That's it," and wore a sly grin. What is it, Mark? Well, this is our last resort. I've come up with something good, for my mom. What? Mark suggested a plan I could never have imagined. Although it could be called inappropriate, that seemed to be the only way to make Martha understand. A few weeks later, Mark was discharged from the hospital. Martha didn't reply to any of our messages, so we didn't tell her about Mark's discharge. In the last 2 weeks, Martha has been relentlessly demanding the money. There's no point in sending money to a mother who doesn't even worry about her son. While Mark and I were enjoying a cup of tea, a message came in on my phone. Upon checking, I found 13 missed calls from Martha again. As I thought, so my phone vibrated again. It was another call from Martha. Hello. I turned on the speaker microphone so that Mark could hear, and Martha started shouting right away. Listen, where's the $3,000 for this month? Excuse me, that's right. The money for this month hasn't been transferred yet. Martha, do you realize Mark is now? I don't care if he's in the hospital or whatever. It's none of my business. You're working at a good place, right? You must have plenty of savings. Hurry up and transfer it here. Martha was shouting angrily. Eventually, she said something unbelievable. Listen, since you married Mark, if he can't pay, you have to pay me. Understand? If you refuse, I'll make you the guarantor. Got it? At that moment, something inside me snapped. She was displaying her desires openly without considering our situation at all. I had reached my breaking point with her. She didn't even try to reflect on her own actions. Now, I had no choice but to resort to the last resort. I firmly declared into my smartphone, Mark has passed away. I can't send you any more money. At these words, Martha blurted out a baffled, "What?" Yes, this was the last resort that my husband suggested. Lied to Martha about Mark's death and observed her reaction. If she showed any sign of sadness, if she reflected on her behavior and apologized, we would continue to support her financially. But if she didn't reflect, if she demanded money, we would sever ties completely. Deep down, I thought that even a money-grubbing woman like Martha would deeply reflect on her actions if she were told that her own son had died. But the very next moment, Martha burst into loud laughter. "Yay, what's so funny?" I asked. "Well, isn't it obvious? If Mark is dead, that means his inheritance will be distributed to me too. Excuse me, I've been looking into it since I heard that Mark was sick. Listen here, 2/3 of Mark's assets are yours, but 1/3 is mine." I was at a loss for words. I never thought that when she first heard that her son was sick, she wouldn't look into treatment, but into how the inheritance would be divided. My anger surpassed. I was simply dumbfounded. My husband seemed to feel the same way, and as our eyes met, he slowly nodded. This was the signal to continue with the plan. I once again said to Martha in a strong tone, "Martha, did you hear what I said? Mark is dead." "I heard. What about it? Aren't you sad your own son passed away before you? You just make sure to send me some. I won't let you get away with not doing it." With a click, the phone line was cut off, and a dial tone echoed. I glanced at my husband and saw that he was shaking, his face red with anger. "Mark, are you okay?" I asked. My husband looked into my eyes and said, "I'm cutting ties with her. She'll likely come here eventually demanding money. Let's wait until then, okay? But are you really okay with this? Cutting off ties just like that?" "Yeah, I have no regrets. After that call, she's no mother." My husband's eyes were filled with hatred, and I felt the same way. A person who only thinks about money over her own son's life is not family to me. A few days later, as we expected, Martha came to our house. For the time being, I decided to hide my husband in the next room and deal with Martha myself. Then Martha approached me with a face like a demon. "Hey, give me Mark's inheritance right now." Again with that? Anything else to say? He's already dead, isn't he? It's pointless to say anything now. Yet you never even visited him. What are you saying? Are you really his mother? You're so annoying. Give me the inheritance right away. I don't mind getting a lawyer. Speaking more would be a waste of time. Just as I thought, my husband emerged from the next room. Seeing him, Martha let out a startled gasp as if she had seen a ghost. "Mark, why weren't you dead?" "Long time no see, Mom," he said. "Sorry, but the news about my death was a lie." "A lie? How could you be so disrespectful?" Martha exclaimed. "I wanted to confirm your true nature, Mom. I was curious about how you'd handle the allowance if your son died. But you turned out to be a gold digger, just as I suspected," Mark replied sternly. "What? How dare you call your mother a gold digger?" Martha protested. "Silence. I'm cutting ties with a toxic parent like you," Mark shouted. Martha's mouth hung open in disbelief at my husband's angry shouts. She could not come to terms with the fact that her own son was severing ties with her. "What? What does this mean, Mark?" she stammered. "It means exactly what I said. I can't consider someone like you as my mother. No way," Mark declared. Then what about the allowance? Do you really think I would? Martha started, but Mark interrupted her. You're on your own with the debts. We're moving, Mark said firmly. Wait, please. If you do that, what about my living expenses? Martha pleaded tearfully, reaching out to my husband. He forcefully shook off her hand, looked at her coldly, and said, I don't care about your living expenses. You have been living off us without even a single apology. I really understand your despicable nature now. Don't you dare show up in front of us again. No, wait, Mark. Are you going to abandon your mother? Martha cried out. But my husband ignored her words. He grabbed Martha's arm and dragged her to the front door. He threw her shoes and bag outside and chased Martha out of the house. Martha made a fuss outside for a while but disappeared after a bit, perhaps unable to withstand the eyes of the neighbors. She tried contacting us multiple times, but we ignored all of her attempts. We set Martha's number to be automatically rejected, and we finished moving. Regarding the matter of co-signing for the debts, it became invalid since Martha had made Mark the co-signer without his consent, and therefore he was not responsible. Without the allowance from us, Martha seems to be leading a miserable life. It's only natural, as she had been using the allowance for her gambling habits instead of paying off her debts. She still has a mountain of debts and is chased by debt collectors every day. She can't gamble anymore and seems to be working from dawn to dusk for the foreseeable future. It's unlikely that she will be able to pay off her debts completely. She will have to keep working until she is unable to move. This is entirely her own doing. As for us, we are spending fulfilling days in our new home. My husband's condition has stabilized, and he has returned to work after some time. Now there's a new life growing in my belly. We're going to have an additional member in our family next year. From now on, we want to spend happy days as a family of 3. My name is Molly, and I'm turning 32 this year. I work as a salesperson at a company. My husband's name is Mike, and we went to high school together. This year is our 10th wedding anniversary. We started dating in high school and kept our relationship going, even when we went to different colleges. But we always loved each other, so we got married right after we graduated. Even though we dated for a long time before getting married, we still love each other a lot. Shortly after we got married, our first daughter, Kate, was born. She's turning 9 this year. Now, I'm pregnant with our second child, and I'm excited about having another baby after a while. But this time, I've noticed some big changes in my health that I didn't experience when I was pregnant with Kate. I've been feeling sick and really tired, which is new for me. Maybe it's because I'm getting older and it's harder to bounce back from being tired, even after I sleep. Or maybe it's because of all the stress from work and taking care of Kate. I thought about different reasons for feeling this way, but when I took a pregnancy test from the store, it showed that I was pregnant. When I was pregnant with Kate, I didn't have any noticeable changes in my health, so I didn't even know I was pregnant at first. But this time, the morning sickness feels much worse. It's been hard to deal with while working in sales and trying to keep up with everything else. But I worried that if my sickness kept up, it would start affecting my job. So I decided to talk to my boss and take some time off work. When I talked about it with my husband, Mike, he seemed surprised and worried. He remembered how things were when Kate was born and was taken aback by how much worse my morning sickness was this time. He said, "Your morning sickness seems really bad this time. You should take a break from work for a while." I agreed, saying, "It's worse than when I was pregnant with Kate. I'm not feeling well at all. I need to focus on my health and the babies." I hoped that resting at home would help me feel better. But my sickness didn't ease up at all. It actually got worse each day. Even though I was at home, I couldn't do much. I spent most of my time in bed because I felt so sick. I wanted to at least do some chores around the house, but I couldn't even manage that. The smell of laundry detergent made me feel even sicker, so I couldn't handle it. At first, Mike seemed concerned, but lately he's been getting frustrated with me. He might be thinking, since you're not working, you should at least do the household chores, right? I felt ashamed that I couldn't even manage simple tasks around the house. I felt bad for Mike, who was busy with work. Since then, he's been acting different. We used to hug every morning. But now things seem to have changed. Before, Mike used to give me a hug before heading to work. But now, he leaves without saying much. He's been really busy with work, often coming home late because he has to do extra hours. His job involves tasks like preparing documents, entering data, and making phone calls. Even though working extra hours was normal for him, he used to cut back after Kate was born so he could spend more time with her. We both used to work, and Mike wanted to help out more around the house to ease my workload. But lately, he hasn't been pitching in as much, and he's been doing overtime regularly. I think maybe me being on leave and us having less money coming in made Mike feel like he needed to work even harder to support us. Maybe he thinks I should do all the housework since I'm not working right now. But with my morning sickness, I just can't meet his expectations. One night, I finally gathered the courage to ask him for help. "You've been working so hard lately, especially since I've been on leave." "I'm sorry," I said. "Well, I have to earn more for the family, especially with the overtime," he replied. "I really appreciate it. I'm sorry I can't do much housework. The morning sickness is severe, and the smell of detergents and food makes me feel sick," I explained. "Really?" he asked. "Yeah, so can you please come home a bit earlier and help out with the chores? Once I feel better, I'll go back to work," I pleaded. Upon hearing my request, Mike looked clearly displeased. "Don't we have our own rules? I'm working hard, even with overtime, to support the family." I found solace in my daughter's reliability. Kay had grown into a kind-hearted girl, and I was genuinely pleased to see her willingness to help. Despite my efforts, the strained relationship with my husband persisted. He began leaving home early and returning late, with little communication between us. With the birth of our second child approaching, I started feeling anxious. Just when I thought our relationship was beyond repair, Kate shared some unexpected news. One evening, as soon as Kate returned from school, she said, "Mom, something's wrong." I recounted, concerned. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" I asked, worried. She shook her head, indicating no, and said, "No, but I feel sick." "What happened?" I inquired, trying to soothe her. Kate hesitated, biting her lower lip before finally speaking. Tears welled up in her eyes as she revealed. "On the way home from school, I saw Dad and Abby's mom kissing." "Really?" I exclaimed, shocked. Abby was a close friend of Kate's, and it was evident that she was deeply affected by what she had witnessed. Unable to control her emotions, she sobbed into my chest. "Oh my God, calm down, honey," I comforted her, holding her close. In that moment, my husband, whom I had considered irreplaceable, became an object of hatred because of his affair. Unable to forgive his infidelity, I vowed to seek revenge. But to do so, I needed to gather thorough evidence. While my husband was away, I began investigating. I searched the rooms and was dismayed to find a large number of receipts that I had never seen before. My morning sickness made it difficult for me to clean up around the house, but I was determined to uncover the truth. I was furious at the disrespect I felt. He thought he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. As I examined the receipts more closely, I realized they were for expensive branded bags and accommodations. Whose money paid for these? I gasped as I remembered something. Despite my pregnancy and morning sickness, I was determined to confirm the truth. It had been a long time since I left the house, and going out like this was rare for me. Feeling unwell, I made my way to the bank, trembling with nervousness as I checked my passbook. There, I was confronted with a reality I wished I could avoid. Just as I suspected, it was from our joint account. Mike and I had opened it after we got married to manage our finances. We saved for our future and paid for our living expenses from this account. But it was also the account used for Mike's frequent purchases of designer bags on his credit card. Even more shocking was the revelation that despite claiming to work overtime, Mike's salary hadn't increased at all. His company was known for being employee-friendly, so his salary should have gone up with overtime hours. But it hadn't changed. At that moment, everything clicked. His late returns home were because he was having an affair with Abby's mother. It was clear that Mike hadn't been working the extra hours he claimed. While I was going through a tough time being pregnant and unwell, he hadn't offered any support and instead engaged in an affair, leaving me deeply disappointed. One evening, while Mike was in the bath, I determinedly took his smartphone. Trying not to alert him, my hands trembled with tension as I entered the passcode. And just like that, the phone unlocked. Perhaps Mike had let his guard down, thinking my severe morning sickness had made me less vigilant. The realization that he had underestimated me fueled my growing anger even more. As I kept my composure, I checked the contents of the smartphone. In the chat app, there were clear exchanges between Mike and Abby's mother, confirming their affair. "I told my wife I have overtime so we can meet tonight," Mike had written. "Really? Can we meet tonight? I can't wait to see you." Abby's mother had responded with a string of heart emojis. If I still had strong feelings for my husband, witnessing such betrayal would have driven me to madness. But now that I no longer harbored any love for him, I was able to focus calmly on gathering evidence. Looking at their recent text messages, I discovered they were planning a trip. It was scheduled for a week, starting from the weekend, with the intention of enjoying various hikes. Of course, my husband hadn't informed me about this trip. I was curious to hear what excuse he'd give on the day of the trip, so I waited patiently. Finally, the morning of the trip arrived. Despite it being a holiday, my husband was busy with preparations from early in the morning. "Good morning. What's got you so busy this early?" I asked, catching him off guard. "Oh, well, you see. What are you doing up so early?" he replied, trying to deflect. "I woke up hearing some noise. What's with the suitcase? Are you going on a trip?" I pressed. "I have a company trip for a week starting today. I thought I told you. Just wait. I'll buy you a nice souvenir," he said hurriedly, attempting to cover up. As if on cue, Kate woke up too. She seemed curious about what was happening, and, with a slightly dazed expression, asked her father, "Dad, what's happening? Are you leaving?" "He's going on a company trip. He'll bring back a souvenir, so let's look forward to it." "Got it? Can't wait for the souvenir." "Take care," I interjected, with a forced smile. With our smiles, my husband left the house with a wry smile of his own. After his departure, we looked at each other and burst into laughter. Dad's voice was shaking when he lied. Anyone could tell he was lying, Kate remarked between giggles. After sharing a good laugh, we began discussing our next steps. "Okay, I'm about to discuss something important. Listen carefully. I'm thinking of getting a divorce." "I believe it's crucial for you too," I said solemnly. Kate's response to the situation was mature beyond her years. She expressed her discomfort with having a father who cheated on me, and she empathized with Abby, her friend, who was likely going through a tough time too. Her concern for Abby's well-being showed her compassion and understanding. Abby's sudden disappearance and betrayal of her daughter's trust only fueled my determination for revenge. I felt strongly that there should be no compromise when it came to holding them accountable for their actions. With newfound motivation, I took decisive actions to protect myself and Kate. I canceled our credit cards to prevent my husband from spending any more money recklessly. I also transferred half of the savings from our joint account to my personal account to ensure a fair division of assets. We moved back to my parents' house, leaving behind the memories of our life with my husband. Kate's positive attitude during the move reassured me that we were making the right decision for our future. Discovering messages between my husband and Abby's mother, where they expressed their desire to be together, only solidified my resolve. I packed up my husband's belongings and sent them to Abby's mother's parents' house, along with the termination of our lease agreement. My husband's subsequent call, asking for money, only confirmed that my actions had hit their mark. Knowing that he couldn't use his credit card anymore brought me a sense of relief amidst the turmoil. Despite the challenges ahead, I felt empowered and ready to start a new chapter in my life, free from the betrayal and deceit of my husband and Abby's mother. It's easy to imagine that my husband's trip with his mistress was very tense for him. Despite his attempts to reach out, I ignored his calls, citing my severe morning sickness as the reason. 3 days later, I received another call from him, which I reluctantly answered. He was shocked to find the house empty and the lease terminated. "Why is the house empty? What's going on?" he demanded, his anger palpable. "Weren't you supposed to be on a trip for 7 days? Why are you back so soon?" I countered, revealing that I knew about his affair and had taken action accordingly. Realizing that I had found out about the affair and was divorcing him, he was visibly shaken. I ended the call and deleted all his contacts from my phone. With nowhere to go, my husband seemingly sought refuge at Abby's parents' house. There, Abby's mother faced severe reprimands from her husband and parents for her lies and affair. Both she and my husband were forced to sign divorce papers and pay compensation before being kicked out. Since returning to my parents' home, Kate and I have been living freely. My worries disappeared, and my morning sickness subsided, allowing me to return to work after my maternity leave. Kate enjoys spending time with her grandparents after school, and the divorce proceedings went smoothly thanks to the support of my lawyer and the ample evidence I had gathered. In order to secure my ex-husband's income, the divorce proceedings proceeded in my favor, allowing me to move forward with my life without the burden of his betrayal weighing me down. I demanded both compensation and child support payments from my ex-husband and sent a letter to his company, urging them not to let him resign. His boss, who was a married man with children, saw the letter and was furious. He negotiated with the company to deduct the compensation and child support payments from my ex-husband's salary. With his boss keeping a close eye on him, it seemed unlikely that he would be able to quit his job easily. My ex-husband was financially struggling because he had spent too much money on his mistress's lavish lifestyle. Losing his home, he was forced to live in a cheap company dorm, making it even harder for him to quit his job. Meanwhile, Abby and her father found peace. Abby accepted her parents' divorce and seemed to smile more compared to before. She told Kate that she genuinely enjoyed living with her father. Knowing that Abby was living a happy life brought genuine relief to my heart. Soon after, I gave birth to a lovely baby boy. The fact that my ex-husband couldn't hold my beloved son in his arms showed how foolish she had been. When Kate saw her adorable brother, she cheered with delight. Looking at both my beloved daughter and son's faces, I vowed in my heart to raise them well and provide them with the love and support they deserved. Today was supposed to be our honeymoon, but just as we finished packing and were about to leave, my husband did something shocking. He tore up my passport right in front of me. His smug expression annoyed me. I never wanted to go on this trip with him in the first place. I had planned to go with my mom. Before we got married, I sensed some tension, but I had no idea how deep the issues were between my husband and his mother. I've never heard of a mother-in-law taking over someone's honeymoon like this, at least not in my circle of friends. I was shocked, angry, and creeped out by the situation. As my husband began shredding my passport with scissors, I looked at my grinning mother-in-law and knew I had to escape as soon as possible. I never expected this, but I had evidence that could expose them. My name is Sarah. I'm 29, and I've been working for 7 years. Recently, my boyfriend of 4 years proposed, and now we're planning our wedding and honeymoon. I met my husband at work, where he was a senior while I was new. He always supported me. When I struggled with new tasks at work, the only person I had dated before was a classmate. But there was something about someone 5 years older. I found my husband dependable and trustworthy. When he asked me out on our first date, I was thrilled. I still treasure the dolphin figurine we bought at the aquarium on that date. He mentioned wanting a serious relationship leading to marriage, and I was elated. We went on many dates, and he proposed to me at the same aquarium where we had our first date. Can I really be this happy? That night, I was so excited that I couldn't sleep. I still remember that feeling of pure joy, like my head was in the clouds. Soon after, we visited his parents' home. However, I started feeling uneasy about marriage there. My father-in-law was kind, but my mother-in-law seemed disapproving. She even commented that he could have married someone more impressive than me, which filled me with doubt and anxiety. Despite this, I tried to brush off my concerns as pre-wedding jitters and continued with the wedding plans. During our discussions about married life, both my husband and his mother assumed I would quit my job. Although I once liked the idea of leaving work after marriage, it didn't seem right anymore. Despite my mother-in-law's persistent suggestions to quit, I decided to keep working at the same company alongside my husband. We disagreed on when to officially register our marriage. He wanted to do it sooner, but we compromised and registered shortly after. Although the procedure was mundane, realizing we were officially married brought me immense happiness. We also discussed having a small, intimate wedding. It sounds like your mother-in-law took over a lot of your wedding planning, insisting on a grand affair instead of the small, intimate ceremony you envisioned. She not only dictated the guest list, but also had strong opinions about every detail, from the program to the decorations and food. This led to the wedding becoming much more extravagant and expensive than you had planned, and you ended up having to cover the extra costs. After the wedding, you hoped for some distance from your mother-in-law, but your husband insisted on living with her, canceling your new place without consulting you. This left you feeling shocked and unheard. The stress from the wedding planning and now these living arrangements added to your anxiety. Despite these tensions, you were looking forward to your honeymoon abroad, a dream destination you had always wanted to visit. However, your husband's suspicious behavior and the prospect of returning to live with your mother-in-law after the trip made you feel uneasy. Unfortunately, your husband wasn't helpful in planning the honeymoon either, adding to your growing concerns. It's clear that your husband took charge of booking the flights and hotels for your honeymoon, which initially seemed helpful given the excitement surrounding the wedding. However, this turned out to be a foreshadowing of something shocking to come. On the day of your honeymoon, as you were preparing for your flight, Edward casually dropped the bombshell that he would be going on the trip with his mother instead of you. This was incredibly confusing and upsetting, especially since you had paid for everything and were expecting to go together as newlyweds. Edward then tore up your passport, which you had given him for safekeeping. Without any regard for your plans or feelings, it became clear that he never intended to go on the honeymoon with you and viewed it as a secondary priority compared to a trip with his mother. When his fully made-up mother-in-law burst into the room, they both laughed gleefully at leaving you behind. This revelation left you feeling repulsed and realizing that you had made a grave mistake marrying someone who disregarded your feelings so callously. This shocking turn of events made you realize the true nature of your husband and mother-in-law, and you were left feeling betrayed and deeply disappointed. It's devastating to realize that your husband had planned to go on the honeymoon with his mother all along, using the preparations as a guise to prepare for their trip. He booked everything under his mother's name and left you with all the costs. This betrayal deeply hurt you, overshadowing any initial happiness you felt about his involvement in planning. The dreamy wedding and honeymoon you had envisioned were ruined by the interference of your mother-in-law and your husband's deceit. Overwhelmed by this situation, you initially couldn't accept it, but soon decided that you needed to act quickly and pursue a divorce. Interestingly, you had been recording audio since the wedding preparations began, initially to preserve memories, but later to document your mother-in-law's troubling behavior. These recordings unexpectedly became crucial evidence for your divorce. As you began packing to leave the house, you discovered shocking evidence that your husband was embezzling money from his company. This revelation added another layer of deceit to an already painful situation, strengthening your resolve to leave and end the marriage. It's devastating to realize that your husband and mother-in-law betrayed you, turning what should have been joyful events like your wedding and honeymoon into painful experiences. Edward's deception hit you hard, especially since you were initially grateful for his help with the honeymoon preparations, only to find out he was planning to go with his mother all along. Edward booked everything under his mother's name and left you with the financial burden, which added to your feelings of betrayal and anger. The dream wedding and honeymoon you had imagined were shattered by their actions. Feeling overwhelmed and hurt, you decided that getting a divorce was the best course of action. Interestingly, you had been recording moments since the wedding preparations began, originally to preserve memories. Over time, these recordings became crucial evidence documenting your mother-in-law's malicious behavior and harassment, which would support your decision to seek a divorce. Despite the pain, you found solace in knowing that these recordings would serve a purpose beyond preserving memories. It's ironic how those recordings became so useful. Just a few days after moving in, I began repacking my belongings, realizing I hadn't opened much since arriving. I wondered if my husband and his mother were already at the airport, which filled me with indescribable anger. Despite only being there a short time, I wanted to erase any trace of my presence, so I thoroughly cleaned everywhere I had been. While cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon shocking evidence of my husband's embezzlement from his company. I immediately called my uncle and recounted everything that had happened. He became visibly enraged, which was an expression I had never seen on him before. I shared the details of my husband's embezzlement and handed over the evidence. My uncle promised to convene a board meeting to address my husband's actions. Before heading back home, my uncle insisted on grabbing some good food together. Despite the unbelievable betrayal of having my honeymoon hijacked, I felt genuinely grateful knowing there were still warm-hearted people in my life who cared for me. A week later, when my husband and his mother returned from what was supposed to be our honeymoon, I had already taken decisive steps to address the situation and seek support from trusted family members. I got a call from my husband, who was furious that I hadn't picked them up from the airport or cleaned the house as he instructed. He yelled at me, demanding to know where I was. With support from my uncle and parents, I had already hired a skilled lawyer who specialized in divorce cases, and the process was underway. Without giving my husband a chance to speak, I told him I didn't want to hear their voices anymore. I questioned why I should pick up someone I'm divorcing, and why I should follow their orders to clean. This left him momentarily speechless, but he quickly resumed his angry ranting. He tried to guilt me by saying he had done me a favor by marrying me and threatened that I would never get remarried if he divorced me. He even had the audacity to demand that I come back and prepare meals for them in a traditional way because they were tired of foreign food. His disrespectful behavior, especially after his scheme with the passport and trip with his mother, made me realize I had never truly known him. Reflecting on this over the past few days, I decided to consult a lawyer about our divorce. When I mentioned the divorce to him, he was shocked and refused to accept it, claiming he wouldn't get a divorce. I could hear his mother in the background, yelling and calling me names. I calmly informed him that I had reported his embezzlement to his company, and they would likely be contacting him soon. I suggested he get his own lawyer and ended the call, sensing his panic on the other end. It wasn't my problem anymore. My husband kept calling, so I simply blocked his number. My uncle knew our honeymoon dates, so right after our conversation, the company summoned my husband based on the evidence I provided. During the meeting, they verified the information and confirmed significant discrepancies in payments. It turned out that the amount my husband embezzled was substantial. In front of the company executives, my husband desperately tried to defend himself by fabricating a story, accusing me of the embezzlement. However, my uncle intervened, stating loudly that I would never do such a thing. They made it clear that my husband and his mother were responsible for the embezzlement, and they were fortunate that the police had not been involved yet. Realizing that the situation was dire and that I was related to senior management, my husband looked defeated. That day, I went to return the wedding gifts to my colleagues since our marriage had ended so abruptly. However, everyone refused, stating that they had given the gifts as a gesture of goodwill. During this interaction, my husband approached me, expressing surprise that I was related to senior management and pleading for forgiveness. He asked if I could persuade my uncle to let him stay at the company and make the embezzlement charges go away. Disgusted by his audacity, I firmly told him that divorce was the only option now, and he needed to face the consequences of his actions. Ignoring my words, he desperately clung on, but my colleagues intervened, and security eventually escorted him away. He was immediately fired from the company, and they are seeking damages for the embezzlement. Afterward, my mother-in-law repeatedly tried to contact my family, likely seeking to meddle further. After consulting with my sensible father-in-law, the calls from my mother-in-law stopped. Initially, he had believed that she was going on a domestic trip with friends and was looking forward to a peaceful week without her constant demands. He later apologized to me, admitting his mistake. Understanding my situation, my father-in-law agreed that I should return to my parents' home and helped me pack. Despite our emotions being high at the time, I went back to my family knowing he was the only reasonable person I could trust in that house. Feeling embarrassed about how my honeymoon was hijacked, I considered resigning from my job. However, my uncle and CEO arranged for me to be transferred to a different office, which helped distract me from the situation. The divorce process with my husband went smoothly thanks to an excellent lawyer. Later, I learned that my father-in-law was involved in planning our wedding and realized my husband had no savings. To cover the substantial alimony, my father-in-law had to sell their family home. Due to rumors and gossip in the neighborhood about my canceled honeymoon, living there became unbearable. My mother-in-law likely couldn't bear the scrutiny, and my father-in-law felt responsible for covering the damages caused by my husband's actions. After being fired and facing damages, my husband suffered a breakdown and moved to a small apartment. Seeing her son distressed, my mother-in-law also became reclusive. My father-in-law, tired of her behavior, considered divorce and asked for help from the lawyer I used. Thanks to the CEO and my uncle, I was transferred to a supportive branch office. I am grateful for their intervention and support. My only regret is missing out on the honeymoon destination we planned. Once things settle down, I hope to take a relaxed trip abroad and move forward from this difficult chapter in my life. My name is Emily, and I'm 44 years old. I work on TV, and my husband, Tom, also 44, has a photography studio. We started dating in high school and got married when we were 26. We were each other's first boyfriend and girlfriend. It felt like we were meant to be together, and we never really thought about being with anyone else. When I was 25, I lost my parents in an accident. It was really tough, but I couldn't imagine going through it without Tom. He was like family to me. After we got married, Tom moved into the house my parents left me, and it felt like I had both my parents and Tom looking out for me. 2 years into our marriage, we had a son, and we were very happy. Tom was great at helping with chores around the house and taking care of our child. He was the ideal husband for a couple like us who both worked. However, my mother-in-law, Jen, didn't like the fact that Tom, a man, did household chores. I want to talk about something that happened 10 years ago because of this. When our son started elementary school, Jen, who lived about 30 minutes away by train, started visiting our house more often. This was because after-school care at elementary school ended earlier than at nursery school, and we needed her help to pick up our son, who couldn't stay home alone yet. Around the same time, my father-in-law, Steve, had retired and was at home more often. Jen had always been a housewife, and Steve couldn't do any household chores. So, whenever Tom naturally started preparing meals in the kitchen, she would say things like, "A man shouldn't be in the kitchen," or "I can't believe this." Our generation would never imagine such a thing. When I first visited Tom's parents' house, she said to me, "Emily, you're going to quit your job, right?" She couldn't let go of the idea that women should be housewives. She also didn't seem to like the fact that I had a glamorous job as a broadcaster. But Tom, who knew me from our high school broadcasting club, always supported my dream of being a broadcaster. Likewise, I supported Tom's dream of being a photographer, and working together was completely natural for us. We managed to get through the tough nursery school days together, and just when we thought elementary school would be easier, we found the after-school care to be less flexible and not very appealing. This situation led to us having to rely more on Jen. Once she started coming into the house, she would make comments like, "The laundry isn't folded properly," or "Isn't this cleaning a bit sloppy? There's dust over there." But Tom would casually reply, "Oh, I'm in charge of the laundry. Is that not okay?" Or, "It's fine. No one dies from a bit of dust." Yet she would still complain to Tom behind my back, saying, "Aren't you ashamed to let your husband do the laundry?" Or, "It's bad for our reputation." However, since her help was appreciated, I just listened without talking back. On the other hand, Jen had old-fashioned views but liked new things. Unusually for her age, she owned a smartphone. "I'm the only one among my friends who has a phone," she would boast. She used the internet to look up various things, saying, "See, you can do these kinds of things so easily now. And you have to use convenient things." She made good use of it, making reservations at restaurants and using services. At that time, our family relied on a delivery service for our shopping orders, done weekly via paper and delivered. This, too, seemed to displease Jen. She would say things like, "You should just go shopping yourself, and the delivery fee is a waste." But when she discovered that the service could be ordered online, she urged me, "Why don't you do this, Emily? Ordering on paper is so old-fashioned." When Jen would stay until late at night so that Tom and I were preparing dinner, she would say, "I have to go back for Steve's dinner, and he won't eat if he's alone." Then she would leave. Steve really couldn't do any housework at all. "Tom, why is it that you, who grew up in such an environment, are so cooperative with household chores?" I asked Tom once. He replied, "Mom always complained anxiously about Dad not helping with the chores. I decided that when I got married, I would definitely help out to avoid being complained about." So it was a case of learning by negative example. Jen was angry that her husband didn't do housework and found it amusing that her son did. I couldn't understand what would satisfy her, but I guessed she just liked to complain. So I tried to keep my distance as much as possible. At that time, I had no idea that Jen was so cornered that she would end up doing something like selling our house without permission. Yes, that summer, I was offered a chance by my company to go on a 2-month business trip overseas to participate in a sports broadcast at the World Championship. It was a rare opportunity, and I felt rewarded for all my efforts. I couldn't pass up this chance, so I immediately consulted with Tom. He was busy with various things and said, "Of course, I want to help. But I'm not sure I can manage to take care of our son John while working," I said uncertainly. Then Jen, who was listening, offered, "Then I'll take care of things at home for a while." Despite my concerns due to past experiences, I had no one else to rely on and decided to entrust my son to Jen. We considered having Tom and John stay at Tom's parents', but it would be difficult to commute to school from there. So Jen decided to come to our house on weekdays. Then I set off on my business trip, successfully completing the sportscasting work and managing to advance my career. Exhausted and relieved to finally return to the U.S., I arrived at my house on a weekday afternoon, a heavy suitcase in hand, only to be greeted by Jen at the entrance as if she had been eagerly waiting for me. As I was about to thank her for taking care of the house during my absence, she uttered something unbelievable. "This house sold for $300,000, so I'm taking the full amount." My tired mind couldn't comprehend what she said for a moment. "This house? Our house?" I asked in disbelief, to which she replied with shining eyes, "Yes, this house." Confused and struggling to make sense of the situation, I replied just that, and Jen burst into laughter, exclaiming, "What are you talking about, Emily? Why would you lie like that? There's a registration certificate in your name." I won't be fooled. She stood there, arms crossed, looking stern. Feeling the conversation was going nowhere, I decided to change the topic to calm her down. "Well, let's set that aside for a moment. Why are you selling it?" I asked. "What belongs to the wife belongs to the husband, and therefore to me. I'm using it to build a new house." Her eyes were bloodshot as she said this, and I started to feel scared. "A new house? Whose exactly?" "Mine and my husband's." "And you guys will live there? This way, Tom won't have to do household chores anymore. I've been so sorry for him," she continued. "I raised him not to do such things, and I won't allow Tom to do household chores in the future." She said this with a look of truth on her face. As I pieced together the story, it turns out that shortly after we got married, when Tom was in the kitchen, she told him to let me do such things. Tom had replied, "No, this house is Emily's. I have to do at least this much." Apparently, she had misconstrued this to mean that Tom was doing chores because he was living in my house. She always believed that Tom actually didn't want to do household chores and preferred to focus on his work. The idea of a working couple cooperating in household chores just didn't exist in her mind. Furthermore, I later found out that after Steve retired, his pension was less than expected, and he struggled to find re-employment. This led to them feeling insecure about continuing to live in their rented apartment. In desperation, they resorted to such an unthinkable action. "No, this house isn't mine, and Tom thinks it's normal to do housework," I said. But Jen interrupted me. "Lies, all lies. You're just interpreting things to suit yourself." I wanted to say that it was actually her doing that. But I first needed to get the facts straight. "Where did you sell it?" I asked. "To AA Real Estate. They did an easy online assessment, sent them the necessary documents, and they sold it easily. It's a convenient world, isn't it?" she replied. It turns out she found an easy evaluation real estate agent online and requested the sale through them. The buyer was looking for a house in that area. "You won't get such a high price for a house this old anywhere else," they said. "They convinced me it was the right time to sell. That's why you should be grateful." Selling a 20-year-old house for $300,000. "I found a good real estate, didn't I?" she added. I looked up the real estate company online and found a website that seemed right. I tried calling them, but there was no answer. When I asked Jen if she had visited the real estate company at this address, she replied, "No, I didn't go there. You don't need to go do that nowadays." I told her, "First, go to this address tomorrow. If you don't, I won't discuss this any further," and reluctantly, she left. The next day, I received a tearful call from her. It's not there. The real estate company doesn't exist at the address. There was only a dilapidated wooden house, seemingly uninhabited," she said, welling up. I was so astonished by her foolishness that I burst into laughter when she returned. She explained that during my absence, she'd have found a house registration certificate in my name and thought she could sell it. So she contracted the real estate agent who shamelessly assured her, "Even if you're not the owner, it's fine if you have that certificate. Some people pass away after all. Just provide us with the family register and signature certificate." Naively believing them, she sent all the requested documents to the agent. When they found a buyer, they asked for a deposit, half of the commission fee. So she transferred $4,800, half of the $9,600 commission on the supposed $300,000 sale. I called the police to explain the situation. 2 officers came to our house. It turns out this kind of internet fraud, posing as real estate agents, has become common. They offer free valuation, ask for official documents, introduce a supposed buyer, take a fee, and then disappear. It was a devious scheme. Recently, with many vacant houses and the ability to fake addresses for document delivery, such frauds have become more common. The fraudsters probably wrote their name on a postbox and received the documents there. Jen was trembling as she answered the police officer's questions. "Let me ask you again, the house deed you sent, it belongs to your daughter-in-law, right?" the officer asked, tilting his head in confusion. "Yes, I did," realizing the gravity of the situation. As the third party got involved, Jen nervously started. "I thought that, well, it belonged to my son." But he was quickly countered by the officer. "Even if it was your son's, isn't it strange trying to sell someone else's house?" he said incredulously. Red-faced, she blurted out, "No, it's not like that. Emily asked me to. She wanted to get the house appraised to sell it," spouting a nonsensical excuse. The officer turned to me and asked, "Is that true?" To which I simply replied, "No, I didn't ask for that." The officer, unsure of whose testimony to believe, eventually seemed to trust me over my visibly distressed Jen. "She says she didn't ask for it. You shouldn't sell things on your own, madame. Normally, this wouldn't even be possible. This is just outrageous, he lectured, and Jen bit her lip, looking down in silence. The officer, now convinced of Jen's rash actions, inquired about the deed registration. You sent a copy, right? When she replied in a faint voice, no, it was the original. The officer was even more astounded, and he shrunk further in dismay, looking at me. The officer asked, will you file a theft report? I answered, no, that document is invalid now. Actually, this house has already been sold to someone else. When we sold it, we could do so just with the registration identification information. The law had changed, so the deed registration wasn't needed. Indeed, I had received the deed when I inherited the house from my parents, but it was unnecessary when selling the house, so I kept it as a memento. Jen, unaware of this, thought that deed meant I still owned the house. Normally, real estate agents would request or retrieve a copy of the deed themselves for verification, but fraudsters didn't need such details. After all the embarrassment, she looked at me resentfully and muttered, why didn't you sell the house? It's a curse to sell your parents' home. People in flashy jobs are like this. I met her gaze and said, Tom wanted it. He needed a lump sum. Tom? Why? She exclaimed, her face turning even bluer with surprise at that time. Tom wanted to start his dream photography business, but didn't have enough funds. The house was our only significant asset, so we sold it to an acquaintance and rented it back. When I explained everything in one go, Jane's shoulders slumped as she muttered, so Tom's success now is because you sold the house, Emily. Well, I could say that, but I believe that spouses should stick together through thick and thin. We're in this together, I replied. Upon hearing this, Jane suddenly began to cry bitterly. I wanted to work too, she sobbed. My husband can't do anything, even now after his retirement. He does nothing. What has my life been for? Her litany of complaints against Tom continued, leaving the police officer struggling to complete the report. Ultimately, the fraud report was filed. But even after 10 years, the culprits have not been caught. It's unlikely that the money will ever be recovered. Following the incident, Steve became vigilant over Jane's actions and took over all financial control, denying her any access to money. Whenever she needed something, she had to request it from him and would be given cash. It's so suffocating, Jane complained to Tom, who reminded her that she brought it upon herself. Now with no disposable income, she works through senior job listings and currently teaches the elderly how to use smartphones. She's well regarded for her ability to empathize with the struggles of older learners. Steve, perhaps due to his pride, found senior jobs unsuitable and quit soon after starting, providing no income. Nowadays, Jen is busier, often leaving him with household duties as she goes out. Interestingly, he's taken an interest in cooking and is getting quite good at it. The roles in Tom's parents' house have reversed, but both seem to have found new fulfillment. As for me, after my overseas business trip, I successfully climbed the career ladder and now anchor the evening news. Tom's photography studio is thriving, and we've managed to save enough to consider buying back and renovating the family home. We are grateful to our acquaintance for allowing us to keep the house despite the outrageous incident. It worked out well for Tom's parents in the end. Our son is turning 17 and approaching adulthood, so I've shared this story with him as a cautionary tale about internet fraud. However, to preserve his grandparents' dignity, I've kept the part about them trying to sell our house a secret. While I was working, I got an email out of the blue. When I quickly got in touch with him, Greg calmly explained that he had fallen in love with someone else and wanted to start a new life with her. He also said he planned to take the fancy car we bought with a loan in my name. Even though I tried to stop him, he hung up on me and disappeared, leaving me with a huge debt. I never thought something so unfair would happen. I felt lost and didn't know what to do. I'm 35 years old, named Hannah, and my husband Greg is the same age. We have a 10-year-old son named Ryan. Ryan has always been really smart, even when he was young, always reading stuff on the computer and asking for my thoughts on it. Despite not understanding everything, I was amazed by his intelligence. Greg, on the other hand, was always changing jobs and couldn't keep one for long. I worked full-time, worried about our future. But recently, Greg managed to keep a job for 3 years and was earning a steady income. He talked about making memories with us, so we decided to buy a $35,000 camper van. But since Greg couldn't get approval for a loan in his name, I had to take the loan for the car instead. Then, on the day our camper van was supposed to arrive, I got a sudden email from Greg saying he'd graciously take the van since the loan was in my name, leaving me to handle the repayments. Confused, I called him right away to ask what he meant. He explained he'd fallen for someone else and wanted to start a new life with her. He mentioned divorce papers we had discussed before and abruptly ended the call. It was the first time I realized I'd been betrayed by Greg. No matter how many times I tried to reach him, there was no response. I even searched for the divorce papers at home, but they were gone. I was left with a huge debt from the car loan. Despite my efforts to contact Greg, Ryan noticed my distress and asked if something was wrong. After hesitating, I decided to tell him everything. Surprisingly, Ryan didn't seem too upset. He even seemed to have anticipated something like this happening. I knew Ryan must be feeling sad deep down, even though he seemed calm. While silently apologizing to him in my thoughts, I worked hard, trying to push away the awful events from my mind. But my body couldn't hide the truth, and my health gradually declined. On the day of a work training session, I couldn't even stand up and had to take a break. I heard my colleagues' concerned voices, but I couldn't respond before collapsing. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor told me I needed more tests and admitted me. I felt pathetic, thinking it was just emotional stress, but seeing the IV drip in my arm and the white ceiling, tears flowed naturally. Suddenly, Ryan burst into the room, looking extremely worried. I quickly wiped away my tears as he asked what happened, afraid I was seriously ill. Assuring him I wasn't going to die, I felt a strong determination to get better for his sake. But my condition was worse than I thought, and I was diagnosed with a serious illness. The doctor recommended surgery as soon as possible. Following their advice, I underwent the surgery. When I was discharged a month later, I found a demand letter for the car loan payment in the mailbox. Panic set in as I realized the repayment should have been deducted automatically from my account. Checking my balance, I saw it had plummeted from $20,000 to only $33.90. I was sure Greg was behind this, and I wanted to demand he return the money. Since I can't contact him, I'm unsure what to do. Without the camper van, I can't sell it either. Everything seemed to be getting worse after Greg left, and my spirits sank lower. Seeing me upset by all these misfortunes, Ryan touched my forehead and noticed I looked pale. He asked if I was feeling sick again, though I didn't have a fever. Physically, I was fine, but I explained to him that Greg not only took the car, but also all our saved money. I couldn't work yet due to my health, and now we were left with nothing. Feeling lost, I apologized to Ryan for worrying him, but he encouraged me, saying it wasn't the time to give up. He suggested delivering newspapers and searching the internet for work. His words lifted my spirits, and I resolved to change my mindset and do whatever I could. Surprised by his determination, I asked how we could possibly get the car back from Dad, considering it was in my name. Ryan then suggested an idea that hadn't crossed my mind before. He proposed using his phone to track Greg's whereabouts, mentioning a hike we went on as a family a month ago. I was amazed by his idea and had never imagined such a possibility. With no idea where Greg was, Ryan suggested checking his phone for any clues from our previous family outing. Surprisingly, Ryan, who is usually very reliable, got lost during our hike. Following his suggestion, we bought him a kid's cell phone and installed a GPS app that both Greg and I could access. With this app, I could see where Greg was in real time, and he seemed to be moving around a lot. Concerned that Greg might give vague answers and escape again if we found him, I voiced my worries to Ryan. To my amazement, Ryan smiled and revealed that he had already taken precautions independently while I was in the hospital, achieving something unbelievable. I couldn't believe how smart my child was. Understanding Ryan's plan, I was amazed and agreed to teach Greg a lesson for betraying us. 3 days later, I received a call from Greg asking for help, claiming he was being questioned by the police because of me. Suspicious, I went with Ryan to where Greg was, only to find him at a forest park near our house where camping was allowed. Greg looked bewildered as he was questioned by the police in front of his car. Feeling a mix of emotions, I asked the police to give us a moment as a couple to talk. Greg seemed uncomfortable with the crowd watching, so he urged us to get into the car. Inside, his mistress was sitting cross-legged, glaring at us. However, that didn't matter anymore. I apologized for the inconvenience and thanked Greg for coming. The police showed up because I filed a report about the missing camper van. Greg, thinking that actions between spouses can't be criminal, didn't understand. But the police didn't see it that way. Since we're now strangers due to the divorce, Greg driving a car registered in my name without permission was considered a crime. Ryan, as sharp as ever, figured all this out. Greg tried to defend himself, saying he only borrowed the car, but Ryan wasn't having it. I asked Greg to return the keys to my car, and after some reluctance, he handed them over. Then Ryan surprised us all by asking Greg why he abandoned his family to be with this woman. Greg was caught off guard and didn't have a good answer. His mistress arrogantly chimed in, claiming she was more attractive than me, and that Greg chose her over his family. Ryan shut her down sternly, demanding answers from his dad. Greg finally admitted that the woman, Mandy, had joined his company 3 months ago. They were attracted to each other at the welcome party for new employees, and later it was discovered that Mandy was pregnant. Greg decided to start a new life with her, leaving us behind. As for why he took the camper van, he explained that he quit his job and planned to sell the car for money. However, since it seemed like we were using it quite a bit, he thought it would be a waste to sell it right away, so they decided to go on a trip. I was surprised to learn all this from Ryan. After he got lost, we bought him a kid's cell phone with a GPS app as a precaution. We installed it on Greg's phone too, so I knew where he was all this time. Ryan confessed that he pretended to get lost during our hike because he wanted a cell phone. I was amazed at his strategic thinking and suspected something was off with Greg, so I came up with this plan to monitor his actions. Facing the truth revealed by Ryan, Greg was speechless. It was pitiful to see an adult like him unable to offer any rebuttal. In contrast, seeing Ryan, only 10 years old, but able to think and speak his mind firmly, gave me a sense of strength as a mother. I felt determined not to lose, especially in settling things properly. I demanded that Greg return the $20,000 he withdrew from my account, which we had saved little by little since I was single. Greg argued that he didn't have to return it since it was joint property, but I was appalled to hear that the money had been squandered by him and his mistress. It was the moment I felt relieved about divorcing him. So that's how it is. But if you stole and used the car and my money, that's going to be a serious crime. Just because I sent the police away doesn't mean it's not their business anymore, right? I only said we would talk. I have no intention of withdrawing the complaint. I must add the theft of my money to the report. Mom, should I call the police now? I can do it with just one button on my phone, Ryan asked. Mandy, Greg's mistress, had been watching our conversation but quickly tried to get out of the camper van. Suddenly, she let out a scream that echoed around. Outside the car door, Mandy's parents were standing, their faces red with anger, about to explode in fury. Startled, Mandy stepped back as her parents yelled at her. "I'm sorry, don't be so angry." "But why are you here, Mom and Dad?" Mandy stammered. "I called your parents beforehand," I explained. "What? Why?" Mandy was shocked. The truth was, during my hospital stay, Ryan had visited Greg's office and tearfully told them, "My dad left the house with a woman we don't know, and my mom collapsed." Seeing Ryan's sorrowful state, The people at Greg's office suspected Mandy, who had left the company with Greg, and gave Ryan her parents' address. Greg and Mandy had been overly friendly at the office, and there were photos showing them together at the welcome party for new employees, looking like a couple. After learning from the office people that Greg commuted from his parents' house, I went there with his photo. His parents came out when I visited, and I told them everything that had happened. So today I contacted Mandy's parents and asked them to wait nearby for a while. "How could you do this to me? That's the worst." "I don't want to hear that from you. That's my line," Mandy retorted. "By the way, your stomach seems quite big. When is the baby due?" "In 3 months," Mandy replied. "What? Wait a minute, that doesn't add up with when you met my husband. You two met only 3 months ago, right? What's going on?" Greg questioned, bewildered. "It's not time for the baby to be born yet," I added. Hearing this for the first time, Greg stared at Mandy, eyes wide. "Wait, what does that mean? Are you stupid? Don't you get it? It takes about 9 months from conception to birth, which means the child she's carrying isn't yours." "You're so foolish. What do you mean, Mandy? Have you been deceiving me?" Greg's voice rose with anger. "I almost got away with it. Can't help it now that I'm caught." "You're so naive. You can't see through lies at all." "Really a fool," Mandy sneered. "Don't mock me. My whole life is ruined because of you." "What were you thinking?" Greg erupted. Greg and Mandy started an ugly argument, but nobody intervened, letting them have it out. Meanwhile, we contacted the police again to explain the situation. As it began to get dark, the forest park was brightly lit by the red lights of the police cars. "No, really, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. I'm sorry. I'll work hard and never cheat again," Mandy finally admitted. "So please, just don't arrest me, Dad. People don't change that easily, especially lazy people like you," Greg pleaded. "Exactly. Ryan's right. I can't trust you at all. Reflect on your actions and pay for your crimes at the police station," I responded firmly. "If I get arrested, I won't be able to pay back the money. Is that okay with you?" Greg asked. "I don't mind. Pay me back after you've atoned for your sins. Take your time. Don't worry. I've already found you a place to work," I assured him. "Let's see, there's Ryan's child support plus the $220,000 you stole from me. I'm not sure how much it will all add up to, but you'll work and pay it all back," I added sternly. I had one last thing to say to Mandy, the mistress. "You might think you're just an onlooker, but don't forget you're an accomplice to Greg's theft. Be prepared for that," I warned her. When I told them that Mandy would have to pay if Greg couldn't return the stolen money, she shivered in fear. Mandy asked her parents for help, but they refused, saying, "We disown a daughter who causes trouble for others." Thus, Greg and Mandy were taken away in a police car together, thanks to Ryan's smart strategy. We were able to punish Greg and his mistress, Mandy. Though they were released from detention soon after, they faced a hefty payment to me. Through a lawyer, I claimed $20,000 in damages. Additionally, I made Greg agree to pay $500 a month in child support for Ryan. I introduced Greg to a subcontracting factory of the company I work for. The support and other charges I claimed from Greg would be deducted from his salary and paid into my account. I also sold the camper van and was freed from the auto loan. Since then, my health has improved remarkably, and I am now energetically committed to my job. Ryan has been actively helping with household chores and errands. I want to keep moving forward strongly so that Ryan can pursue the path he loves without giving up.